session of the Tacoma Park City Council. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Costick. Here. Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy. Here.
All righty. Let's get going. I think first up, there were a couple of things that needed to be removed. Had it been posted? I'm asking the city clerk. Oh, okay, next week's agenda. This week's agenda stays the same. Okay, awesome. So then our first item tonight is a report from an update from our youth council.
Hello. So in the past 2 weeks since our last update, we've been working on planning another documentary screening. We've reached out to Heather Booth about screening her movie, and as soon as we get confirmation on a date, we will work on when she will be available, or when the movie will be available for screening. We'll work on when that can happen. I met last week with County Councilmember Hans Reamer about establishing a youth county council. I'm going to follow up with him about what he thought about the meeting, but he seemed receptive to the idea, and I think it would be important to make sure that there's youth representation on the county level as well as on the city level. I spoke with Leisha Monfort of the rec department about the youth jobs program and what could be done to help expand it and make sure more teens get the opportunity to get a summer job. The main takeaway from that call was that it's not necessarily an availability problem. It's an outreach and retention problem. They have a lot of students at the beginning, and then as the process goes on for preparing for their interview, they start to lose. So when that process starts again in the spring, I hope to work with her more about on making that more accessible, I guess, and making sure that more students stick with it. And finally, we are we plan to change the way we do our newsletter. Instead of sending out 2 newsletters every term, we'll send out a series of smaller newsletters about specific things we've been working on, and our advisor has reached out to the city communications specialist about coming to our next meeting to talk in more detail about what that might look like.
Cool.
That's everything. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, George.
Sounds like you've been busy.
Yep. Awesome. All right, next we'll have public comments on voting items. Our one voting item tonight is a single reading ordinance authorizing reimbursement for festival expenditures, and that would be the Tacoma Park Folk Festival and the Tacoma Park Independence Day celebration.
Mayor, I'm going to recuse myself from this
Yes.
discussion
Please do. You want to tell people why?
because my wife is the treasurer of the Independence Day Committee.
Awesome. Great. All right, any public comments on this? No? Seeing none, we will now move into our voting session. It is the single reading ordinance authorizing reimbursements for festival expenditures. The city manager just want to...
I think it's quite straightforward. There's the 2019 adopted budget included $25,000 for the Independence Day celebration. The FY20 budget, which is the current one, includes $17,500 for the Tacoma Park Folk Festival. Generally, in the past, the city had contributed its money to the Independence Day celebration for fireworks, and they needed to be purchased in the previous fiscal year. In this case, because there wasn't fireworks, the actual expenditures happened during this fiscal year, so the money got carried over from FY19 to FY20, and this is the authorization of reimbursement of those accounts.
Great. All right, would someone like to move the single reading ordinance? Councilwoman Costick moved. Do I have a second? Councilmember Smith, any questions or thoughts?
Just one clarification. The funds are going to be carried forward in budget amendment.
In the budget
number
amendment, I'm
two,
sorry.
which
Yes.
comes to you in mid-November.
And that's what we have the work session next week. All right, seeing no comment, oh,
I
yeah,
have one question about festivals.
yes,
Yes.
that's where we are. You made it right in time.
Right in time. So, and maybe you addressed this before I walked in. Sorry to be a couple of minutes late. On the festival and Independence Day, not that it necessarily matters for passing this, but do we know if both of them are in the black as festivals, and whether they're rolling over the funds they've raised and didn't use to the next annual event.
I don't have information on that. This is the amounts that have been allocated by the council, and then they have to show their receipts. So
And
with
that's
this-
it.
And
Yeah.
that's it.
Right, we don't see the whole
This,
picture.
this
We-
isn't something that evaluates their other
Right.
funds.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or thoughts? All right. Seeing none, I will ask the city clerk to call the vote, because it's a single reading ordinance.
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala.
Aye.
Councilmember Costick. Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy. Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Okay. Does somebody want to go get Councilmember Siemens? Councilmember Siemens? Come back. All right. We're a little early, but do we have any other public comments this evening? Ms. Materia? I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Karen. General, this is general, yeah, we're,
Wrong, because you might have to give an hour presentation, sorry. But, hi, Mary Jane Matui, Ward 2. I'm going to speak, I've spoken out against the bad parts of gentrification, the racism, et cetera. I'd also mostly talk about, thanks, Council Member DeBala for having an open house. There you are, yesterday. Thank you. We had changed some ideas. One of them was Montgomery County Councilman Glass's proposal that owners of older homes pay taxes when they demolish them. But Cindy said that the word demolish legally meant something different. It means they had to completely demolish them and leave just the foundation, which has not been the case, at least in my neighborhood, unfortunately. But it was, if I had my way, these developers wouldn't even be allowed to build these houses much bigger and hold them for lower income people to move up from their apartments and people like me to stay in place. Anyways, also we discussed the fact that Tacoma Park, and she is not the only one, it says that the city does not provide social services. I beg to differ. For instance, our housing and community services, that's social services. The recreation department is by and large social services. Ditto for the library, ditto for the police department. When I saw that man passed out a couple months ago out in the parking lot, who did I call? The police? Because who else do I go to? That's social services. And the city also gives grant money to organizations that provide social services. So I beg to differ. And then we are, parents of special needs or adults are just advertising for our grown children who've given their share of these social services. That's all we're asking. And thank you very much.
thank you, Ms. Matui. Any other public comments this evening?
Good evening. My name is Cynthia Mariel, and I want to reinforce for all the council members to look at their email. Mid-afternoon today, an email was sent out by Colleen Cordes to all of you regarding radiation emissions from cell towers at the Park Ritchie apartments. And it is time, once again, for the city council to show their commitment to racial equity, because this is an environmental justice issue. This is a social economic issue. This is an issue about the moral compass of Tacoma Park. And Mr. Siemens, you have provided decades of leadership in Ward 4 in protecting the residents. And I'm not only calling upon you to work with Colleen, to work with Rick Myers, to work with Theodora, to advocate at the county council level. I'm calling for all of you because you might be elected by one ward in this city. However, you make decisions that pertain to all of it. Councilperson Searcy, you know the history of environmental injustice on people of color. We don't need to repeat that in Tacoma Park. It may not be tainted water, but radiating our children, radiating our families, it is not acceptable, and it does not matter what the FCC says about what you can or cannot talk about regarding cell towers. This is an issue for the city of Tacoma Park. We have led the way on so many other issues. We cannot let this slip through and let Maple Avenue become the next demonstration project of unhealthy living conditions for our residents. Please respond and let us know you will commit.
Mr. Siemens, did you want to?
I just wanted to say that the numbers that were reported in that email are very concerning and certainly deserve looking into. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Karen Elrich, a longtime resident of Tacoma Park. And as one who spends a lot of time talking to my fellow Tacoma Parkians, I have never heard any concerns expressed about flyers. Concerns about the junction? Yes. Concerns about the Tacoma Park tree canopy? Yes. Concerns about speed bumps, traffic lights, and congestion? Yes. Concerns about the future of John Nevins Andrews School and the Adventist Hospital? Yes. Concerns about the escalating cost of the library? Yes. Concerns that there are too many flyers for yard sales and dog walkers? Never. I don't even understand why this is being discussed. I can't believe you can find even 1 or 2 dozen citizens are concerned about flyers. Even changing the law on this issue seems unwise. But to actually devote taxpayer monies to hire someone to tear down a dog missing poster is pure governmental overreach. Instead of employing someone as a community flyer police, why not use the money to help homeowners identify invasive species or to sponsor a voluntary recycling program for renters? I think the people of our wonderful city can survive the occasional yard sale this Saturday or block party this weekend notice. Can we move on to something more important, like climate change or the emergency thereof? The Tacoma Alliance for Local Living Economy, TALLY, which is a working group of Tacoma Park Mobilization, is offering a Wednesday climate action coffee series down at Busboys and Poets. It's at 7:30 in the morning till 9, but we are in an emergency. Time to get up, have some free coffee, and talk about climate and what we can do. This November 6th from 7:30 a.m. to 9 a.m., we're doing building equity and promoting drawdown in our regional food systems. Our Maryland delegate, Laura Charkodian, is going to be there. Heather Braskin from the Montgomery County Food Council is going to be there. Carolyn Taylor from the Montgomery Countryside Alliance is going to be there. And Philip Ognaduff from the Biodiversity for a Livable Climate are all coming to talk with us on how we can prepare Tacoma Park to equitably address the food issues that will be one of our biggest challenges created by climate change. Hope we can see you all there.
Great, thank you. All right, any other public comments this evening? I'm not sure how this works. Okay, well, we'll walk you through it. Just go to the mic.
I have more of a question than I have comments. My question has to do with this new...
Wait, 1 second.
Yes.
Can you state your name?
My name is Margot Cable,
Okay, and where do you live?
Tulip Avenue.
Thank you.
My question has to do with this new sign that has appeared on our local dog park that says for commercial use only. I have dogs. I pay people to walk my dogs. I pay people to take my dogs to the dog park. My dogs can no longer go to the dog park. I think this is a big problem. My taxpayer dollars have paid for the dog park. I work so that I can pay taxes and pay dog walkers to take care of my dogs. So I'm completely mystified as to why this is the case. I've not heard from the city side. I've heard other. So in part, my question is, I would like to hear what your thought is, what your reasoning was behind putting this up over, because now I can't even hire my neighbor to walk my dogs to the dog park, because that, I would pay them, and I imagine that would be considered commercial use. So I don't even think the county has this kind of a regulation. There are county parks, and they allow commercial use. So I'm completely baffled by this. I'm very frustrated. My dogs are frustrated. I really hope that we can take this sign down and go back to letting dogs go to our dog park that was very expensive. We'd like to make good use of it.
Thank you. And during the city manager's comments, we do we have these available? Yeah, we can give you a copy in case.
So
you
a
can't wait.
document has been prepared with background? Is that?
Yeah,
is
the
that
city
case?
manager has background on it in her city manager comments tonight.
And will I be able to get that? Because some of us really are interested in that
Yes,
shirt
it
that you
will
have
be-
on and the Nats game and the World
I
Series.
know, that's why I wanted to see if we can give you a copy of it.
Awesome.
I'm not sure, I mean, I
That'd be
probably can give
fabulous.
you a copy now, but also it will be posted as well on the website. We always post my city manager comments.
And if you want to go home real fast, you can switch back and forth before the Nats game starts and the city council meeting.
Would, all right, if Peter will send it to me, and you're going to give me a copy?
Yes, just.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much.
It's
All right, thank
The items
you.
near the bottom there.
Great. Any other public comments this evening? And just to recap, you have 3 minutes for public comments. Come to the podium, state your name and where you live. And a beep will go off when you have 30 seconds left.
Okay. Hello, my name is Candace Reed. I'm here about the dog park. I live on 921 Sligo Creek Parkway. I adopted a rescue dog 2 years ago. She's a Husky Shepherd mix. She's my first dog, and I had no idea about the amount of energy that she has. I'm a vice president of a company. I work from home, but I travel a lot. I have a lot of conference calls, and I found a dog walking service, and Chrissy, it's been marvelous. And it was recommended to me by several of my Tacoma Park neighbors who use it, and it's been a wonderful find. They pick my dog up at 11, take her to the dog park, bring her home at 2. She's splayed out, exhausted. It's just like when the dog is happy, the household is happy. It's really a lovely thing, and. Traumatically, last week when the signs went up saying no commercial use, my dog was out with the group. So they were left scrambling and didn't know what to do with the dog, so they went to the dog walker's home. And my dog, there was inadequate fencing in the back, and my dog got out and escaped. From 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 11 the next day, I was out looking for my dog. I had to take my daughter to school in tears, and I have to be frank. It just feels like it was an unnecessary ordeal. I will say that Mayor Kate just took the time to hear from us. I'm just speaking again so that the rest of you can hear, and also Cindy and Suzanne did as well. I'm just saying that it just felt out of character for this neighborhood to just have these signs posted like you can't come in, when to my knowledge and the knowledge of my neighbors, there was no problem. There was no issue. There was no, why was this just closed like this? So it just felt out of character for this neighborhood. Let's talk about it. Perhaps you open the dog park up while we discuss what a solution is. I know that there's talk about a permit process. I know I would be happy to pay for the permit to support this enterprising young woman that started this company, and that we would all like to support. And so anyway, thank you for hearing me, and I hope we can resolve this quickly.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Reed, and thank you for meeting with us earlier today. Anyone else want to?
Hello, my name's Laura Esquivel. I've been a homeowner in Tacoma Park for about 15 years. I'm also here about the dog park. I appreciate also you meeting with us before the meeting, and the chance to air our view. I mean, how many of you are dog owners? Yeah, it's easy to get emotional about your dog, right? So sorry about that. But I really, am here in support of taking down those signs that seem to have, appeared from one day to the next without any real explanation, without any opportunity to address any complaints, without knowing what the complaints were. So that just seems like really arbitrary. And in the meantime, as was pointed out, it's our dogs, who are also Tacoma Park residents, who are the ones who are suffering. For years, we have wanted there to be a dog park here. And for years, we have used the dog parks of other communities, and nobody's ever told us that we couldn't. So now, here we have a dog park, and we're being told that our dogs can't use it unless they pay a special fee, unless they do who knows what. And it seems very arbitrary. I would really strongly request and recommend, if there's going to be some discussion that leads to a decision, that this be a public discussion, that it be noticed properly so that people have an opportunity to give input, because that hasn't happened yet. And in the meantime, if there has been no infraction, I don't see why the park cannot remain open, because there have been absolutely no problems whatsoever, other than some people not liking that this is happening. That's not a reason. I don't know whether they're even Tacoma Park residents or not, but we don't ask people, if they live here or if they don't, if they can use our public services. We certainly shouldn't be denying them to the people who do live here. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
My name is Chrissy Leone, Sligo Avenue. Chrissy Leone. I think I wasn't on the mic at first. I have been here, so I wanted to do two things. To give like a brief, I'm going to try to be brief, although it's not really my strong point. Synopsis of what's been going on for the past 7 months while we've been at the dog park. And then I also wanted to debunk a myth about playgroup, because even my friends can't really wrap their mind around playgroup, and they wrap their mind around doggy daycare, maybe because it's very similar to dropping your kid off at daycare. They're there all day at a facility where they pay rent, a brick and mortar place, and then they pick them up at the end of the day. But a doggy playgroup is very similar to a walk, where we go to a customer's home, we pick up their dog, we take them out, and then we bring them back to their home. And we don't camp out at the dog park for hours. We just bring rounds of dogs. We have 2 vans that go out. They each go a different direction. They pick up about 7 to 10 dogs. They bring them to the park. They run around for an hour. Then they go home. And the van leaves to get another group. They come back with a second group, pick up the first one. And so we have 4 groups that are staggered there. So the only information that I've heard is that there was someone from DPW, whatever that acronym is, that said we had 30 dogs there, that said the people seemed like they were in compliance with the rules, the 3-to-1 dog ratio that's required. That's just not true, because we've never had 10 employees there, ever. We've only ever had 7. We don't have more than 20 dogs. And we actually had slides we submitted. I don't know if they were got a chance to be projected. But I wanted to actually show you, thank you. I wanted to actually show you what it looks like, because so with people thinking that it's like a doggy daycare, they could think, oh, these dogs are coming from Northern Virginia and using our spot and putting all this wear and tear on our property. I mean, that's just not happening. It's the dogs that the place was planned for coming out there. So I think that there's 2 people, there's 2, I don't want to say their names, they aren't residents, and they've gotten some people to be their mouthpieces who've never actually come out to the dog park. The people who we've met, there's about 30 new friends we've made, people and dogs. 6 of them have become clients with us since working with us, which is a really good percentage. And it's indicative, you would suggest that much more than that actually like us, because not everybody needs us. They might like us, but they don't actually need us, so they haven't become customers. So by and large, people appreciate us being there. We've put umbrellas there because there's no shade. We don't complain to you guys about, oh, there's not shade, there's no water. There's water down there. We walk down, we fill the jugs when we leave for everybody else. We're conscientious, we're thoughtful. And yeah, and I've been living here since 2000. So I moved to Tulip Avenue here in 2002, 30 seconds. And when I was here, there was Mark's Kitchen, Taliano's, and Chuck and Dave's. For anyone here who's lived here as long as I have, if you think about how long it's been since Chuck and Dave's here, that's how long we haven't had a park. We haven't had a park for years. And we've been going to Silver Spring, Wheaton, Shirlington. I'm not complaining. But now we have a park and we're like, get out? I mean, that's just not us. It's like, it's not just this hippie, like, oh, we're inclusive. We have a park. We can go searching down this rabbit hole for other models of how to imitate a cost and whatever. But if there isn't a problem, if it really was just 2 outspoken, loud people making it seem like there's more issues than there are, can we just, give some consideration to the fact that maybe we don't need to go down the route of searching out some other model, and we can just put it on pause and say maybe we operated in haste, and maybe we can take the signs down, do some research, and if we find out from some residents that maybe there is an issue, then we can move on and deliberate and talk and hear opinions and stuff like that. It's stuck at 8. So
I know, I stopped it, sorry.
Oh, you're very
But
thoughtful.
don't tell anyone I did that for you.
I was like, I'm trying to look at time, yeah. But I mean, we're really, by and large, we're appreciated there. We're thoughtful. We've told the people who complain about us that we're like, look, if you don't want us there, we're in compliance with the rules, but we're part of the community. We want to work with you guys. If you want us to put our dogs in the van and give them a break and you have the space for yourself, you can do that. We'll pull out 2 dogs and they can actually play.
Yeah.
You know, so there we
Thanks,
go.
Chrissy.
Thank you.
But shush, don't let anybody know I gave you extra time. All right, any other public comments this evening? All right, seeing none. And yes, thank you very much for sending the photos. We weren't able to actually get them uploaded in time for the meeting, but I made sure all the council members got a copy of them, so thank you very much for that. All right, where's my agenda? All right, seeing no other public comments this evening, we can move on to council comments. Do we have any city council members who have comments? Councilwoman Costick.
Thank you. I know we're going to talk more about the dog park in a minute, so I won't address that except to say thank you for the pictures. This is the only time I've had a handout with beautiful dog pictures in it before, which is fun. I also wanted to ask staff, could we look into an alternative arrangement for where that monitor is?
Yeah.
Because I can't actually see people when they're addressing us. Oh, really? Yeah. And I think maybe it was when the monitors were replaced, but it's a different configuration than it used to be. So I just have a couple of updates and one reminder to people. First of all, there's a time change on Sunday, and we are going, yes. But the bad news is it changes us into a time when it's going to be darker in the evenings. And if I'm thinking about that right, and it's a time when it's actually much more dangerous for pedestrians. So I want to remind everyone to be very safe when they're walking, and when you're driving, keep an eye out for pedestrians, please, because this is a time when more pedestrians are hit by cars. A couple of updates on upcoming events. This Saturday, there will be a performance here in the community center by the Silk Road Dance Company at 1 p.m. and I highly recommend that people check it out. It's a dance company that performs pieces from Central Asia, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer, so I have a personal interest in that and have seen them before, and it's a great performance. I will also be on Talk of Tacoma with Eric Bond on Sunday, so please tune in for that if you're interested in hearing me on the radio. And on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, November 5th, there will be a PTA meeting at Tacoma Park Elementary School that we as a council will be on the agenda for. A number of us are going to go and simply be there as an opportunity to introduce ourselves and talk with people a little bit about what the council is doing and what the city is doing, and just make those additional connections. So if people have school-age children, I encourage you to attend that event and connect with us. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. First thing I want to say is I had an opportunity to see the Montgomery Symphony Orchestra at Sligo Church on Sunday. It was an excellent performance. It's 100% free. The next time they will be performing is December 15th, so please check your listservs. You will not be disappointed.
I didn't realize that 2 council members were there, but it was really good.
Yeah, it was excellent. The other thing is, last week I had the opportunity to meet with the residents at 657 Houston Avenue. Their building is on the market. There is a ratified contract. So I worked with city staff to set up this meeting so we can talk to residents about them forming a tenant association and possibly looking at their rights to either purchase the building or talk to a nonprofit developer that the city has worked with in the past and see if they would purchase the building. The building needs a lot of work. The ratified contract is for $2.2 million, but it is really important for me to maintain affordable housing in the city, and if we can get the right owner and operator, it would be a great way for us as a council to show that affordable housing is one of our priorities. And then finally, Monday, I was at the National League of Cities. They always do these reports. The report that I got to see the unveiling for was the fiscal health of the cities around the country. The biggest takeaway that they're seeing is they think there will be a recession in 1 to 2 years. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you. I don't have a dog in this fight, but I did want to, I just did want to say that I am quite familiar with the dog walker, Chris, and Adventist Community Services is right next door to her property, where she houses many dogs during the daytime. And for what it's worth, I would just say that they're an amazingly well behaved group of dogs I've ever seen. They very seldom bark, even when people are out in our parking lot. And she keeps them well under control. The dogs seem happy. They're running around all the time. At first, I thought they were all drugged because they're so well behaved, but they're very active. They're very active and playful and seem to have a good time there. So I don't know for what that's worth, but I just thought I'd mention that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Searcy.
Good evening. Man, this has been the longest short week ever. Monster Bash was amazing. Had a fantastic time. Wonderful costumes. Yeah, it was great. So I just want to thank again the rec department for the wonderful job that they did organizing the event. It was a really great experience. Also had an opportunity, along with Councilmember Kostick, to attend the vigil on Sunday for Julio Vargas Valero, who was a pedestrian who was struck down and killed on University Boulevard. It was really powerful to see the delegates that were able to come out, Lord Cherkudian, Janelle Wilkins, and also representatives from Councilmember Hooker's office were there. There were folks from MDOT as well. So one thing that was nice is that we were all committed to really try to work to address the pedestrian issues along University Boulevard that are only, it's problematic, but it's exacerbated by the Purple Line construction that is taking place. So definitely thankful that we had the opportunity to go and meet with all of the organizers, including Action Committee for Transit, which is also an amazing group that's lobbying and fighting hard for pedestrian safety issues. There are, we had meetings, traffic discussions. So I want to thank Daryl. On Saturday, we met with residents that are, as well as the folks from Our Lady of Sorrows and Don Bosco, to talk about traffic calming needs along Lurch and Kentland. So it was a really great experience. It was actually quite nice to not only have the residents that are expressing concerns that they have in terms of cut through traffic and the need for traffic calming, but to also have a key stakeholder in the church and the school there as well to kind of talk about things from their perspective. I think, when we're having traffic conversations where it involves interactions with residential as well as commercial space, it's important that we try to have those conversations collectively. I think it helps to foster a greater understanding. There might be points where you say, well, actually, if we permit only parking, then it might negatively impact the church on Sundays, and do we really want to do that? So having everyone at the table really does help to foster those types of discussions. So definitely look forward to having additional discussions with residents about traffic calming needs as they relate to the Purple Line, but also other things. There is we're going to have a lot of meetings coming up. So the New Hampshire Gardens Community Association meeting will be on Tuesday the 12th. And that'll be another opportunity to hear from residents that are dealing with cut-through traffic in New Hampshire Gardens. I need to triple check, but we've also been invited to attend a meeting with residents in Prince George's County near Hillwood Manor. So Carroll Highlands is having a neighborhood association meeting and has asked us to come and just kind of sit there and hear about some of the concerns that they're having as well, dealing with cut-through traffic. So we are continuing to have folks that are interested in requesting petitions for traffic calming measures. So definitely look forward to working with city staff and my colleagues on the council to try to come up with a strategy for addressing the traffic needs. And I think that's it. And I know the city manager had a conversation with JBG about some of the cut-through traffic that's happening. And we'll talk more about that during your comments, but definitely we'll need to continue to reach out to the businesses in the Crossroads area as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, appreciate it. I did want to acknowledge first the comments that were made earlier about the cell towers, and I will tell my colleague, Mr. Siemens, I'd be happy to work with him on figuring out what steps may make sense on that. I did see the email this afternoon, but hadn't had too much of an opportunity yet to do anything about that. And with regard to the dog park, I know we'll be talking about that when the city manager reads her comments. It may be necessary, or it may turn out to be something that we decide to have a fee or a permit process for, but if that takes a while to get to, then I'd like to find a way to enable continued access while we do that. So that would be my preference. Two other things that are happening at the next two council meetings I just wanted to mention. We've done a series of these earlier meetings from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. that the mayor has organized. We had one with the Postal Service recently, for example, and with Pepco. And next week, it's going to be Montgomery College and their construction firm making a presentation on the construction plans for the new Mass Science building that's going to be constructed in North Tacoma, and other questions about that project as well can be answered. But I think the focus will be on construction. So it'll be an opportunity, there will be an opportunity for public Q&A. So I encourage, in particular, residents from North Tacoma who have concerns or questions about that to join us there. And I think we've been trying to work out some guidelines and protocols for the construction process to help mitigate, although not eliminate, the negative effects that will be associated with the project. And hopefully we'll have something to announce on that fairly soon, too. And then the week after that, on the 13th, which will be representatives of the state's Department of Assessment and Taxation, a lot of people ask questions about what seem to be unusual or inconsistent patterns and trends in some of the recent reassessments that took place, and we've been working on trying to get somebody from that office to come in. I say we. I asked the city manager and the mayor to do it, so the we is not really me, but they've set it up, and I think that will
The
be
story of
helpful.
my life, Peter.
It works out really well. And well, these tables are moving. So that'll also be an opportunity, not for people who have individual problems with their assessment. You know, there are opportunities, obviously, that have since expired for people to challenge that, but this is more to look at thematic problems or concerns that people have. I think it'll be interesting. I don't know exactly what to expect, but that's the 13th from 6 to 7 p.m. And again, members of the public can ask questions. Thank you.
Councilwoman DeBala.
Yeah, really, really quickly, one of the things that came up, not actually literally in my office hours, but as a result of someone calling who couldn't make it, there's a couple of provisions in the rent stabilization code that apply to some details of rent stabilization that I'd like to follow up with the city attorney about and see if there's some way we can get some clarity on that. It concerns a particular resident, but it applies to more than just that one resident, I think. And the other thing on traffic calming, just FYI, everybody, there are petitions in 2 parts of Ward 2 now. So if anyone is interested in signing on in the Forest Park area, Lower Prince George's Avenue, and for, in the Long Branch Sligo area, for the upper part of Central. Some of that is the same spillover, not as dramatic, but some of it is the same spillover that is happening as a result of the Purple Line further up, further north in the city. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just a couple of things tonight. For Councilwoman DeBala, I'd love to know what your question is on rent stabilization, because I need to give a presentation on our rent stabilization on Sunday to a group that is looking to advocate for rent stabilization in the county. So I'd love to connect with you.
I will do a group email
Yes,
tomorrow
that
morning.
sounds
and
awesome.
include the city attorney.
Thank you. The other thing I want to is to extend a thanks to the city manager and to all the residents who hopefully are either at the budget forum with the county executive right now talking about tax duplication, or the people who wrote in regarding tax duplication. I know the city manager has a piece in her comments, as well as there's a place on the city website that addresses this, but this is a real issue. One of the things I just want to highlight is the fact that even though we need this comprehensive change to tax duplication, the rates that we get back, the amount of money we get back, has been frozen at 2012 rates without taking into account inflation. At a minimum, we need the county executive to put in his budget that we get reimbursed, brought up to the current rate of inflation. Like, we need a comprehensive change, but at a minimum, we should be demanding, and I'm saying demanding of the county executive, that they bring it up to the current rate of inflation. It is a significant amount of money for the city. So just want to put a plug in for that. And then finally, I just really do want to thank Ms. Reed and everyone who came out tonight in the rain and on short notice right before the World Series that's happening now. I'm sure that as we work through this, we will find a solution to the current situation at the dog park. And I just want to say, I appreciate you taking the time on such short notice to meet in person. Emails are helpful to get information out, but they don't replace the face-to-face communication when things can be stressful and tense. And so I very much appreciate you taking the time. So thank you.
Ditto.
And I think with that, I will turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you. I will jump around a little bit in my city manager comments, but I want to reiterate the point made by the mayor about tax duplication. Please contact the county executive now. They are preparing the budget for FY21. We have been underpaid, under-rebated for many years since the county executive was a member of this city council. And I think we should get back money, but at the very least, we should be getting the inflation amount since it was frozen from 2012. There is information on the website. From everything that I understand, I think Mr. Elrich doesn't think there's a lot of people who care about this right now. And so really outreach is important. Please take the time to email, to go to a budget forum, and to let him know that we will not keep trying to just provide so many services without getting the right rebate. I'm going to switch right now to the issue about the dog park because the folks are here. If I may, and then jump around a little bit more. So I did include in my city manager comments some information about the issue over the dog park. Note that city staff had observed and received complaints about heavy use of the city's dog park by a commercial dog care business. I understand the business did schedule enough staff to meet the requirements that there should be no more than 3 dogs to a person, but the heavy use did prompt a request to have a no commercial use sign posted at the dog park, consistent with the assumptions that had been discussed by the former city council about how the dog park should operate. Remembering those discussions and the expected use of the dog park, I approved the sign. Very quickly, I heard from residents and other upset clients of the business, which apparently does not have an alternative outdoor facility to use, or at least not one clearly in Tacoma Park. I have been doing additional research. I appreciate the contact and the information that's been provided to me. I've looked at commercial use restrictions around the country and in this area. There are many commercial use restrictions. In many locations, the total number of dogs from a commercial business is very limited. So a dog walker who's got 3 dogs that comes by is something that is accommodated often, but something that's more significant of a business either is prohibited or there's some kind of a permit process. And so we were looking at the different options and trying to see what makes sense. Just a refresher for those who may be listening, that the Tacoma Park Dog Park is relatively small physically. When it was constructed, there were discussions about whether or not there should be a membership requirement, which could include a residency requirement and/or a fee paid by the dog park users. There were also discussions of having certain hours for small dogs because the park is not large enough to have an area just for them. Any restrictions or membership processes add expense and administration and require monitoring. So it was decided to try having the dog park open without these requirements and see how things would go. While our city parks are available for use by individuals, the City of Tacoma Park does rent out park facilities and city rooms to groups and businesses for events. With groups and businesses, we charge a fee to offset costs, and we look to ensure the facilities are available to rent by a range of groups within the city. We allow some regular or longer-term rentals. Sports leagues may rent out fields and gyms, and we allowed a church whose building was under construction to rent this room on Sunday mornings for the duration of their construction project, obviously at a fee. If the council wishes to allow for a rental agreement for the dog park, we can make those arrangements. Normally, it would be part of a council budget discussion, but it could be done on a trial basis with more formal consideration during that FY21 budget process. We'd need to determine the cost per hour and the days and hours that the dog park would be rented out. In speaking with staff, city residents tend to use the dog park most heavily before and after work and at lunchtime. Rental of the facility could be limited to weekdays during, say, 2 hours from 9:30 to 11:30 or 1 to 3 in the afternoon. There could be a maximum number of dogs allowed. There could be could it be an exclusive rental, or could it be a shared use where you have a rental and other people could use the dog park? Consistent with our other city facility rentals, rental agreements would be on a first-come, first-served basis. The rentals would be for a set duration. So if you're renting something on a regular basis, you re-up it, like twice a year, that kind of thing. And charges for Tacoma Park businesses would be lower than those for businesses that are located outside of Tacoma Park. It's consistent with our residency provisions. That is something that I have the authority to do as a temporary measure if that's something that is agreeable with the council, and that can happen relatively quickly. But there's other options that we could consider, and so it could be we could issue memberships for use of the dog park to all users, and there could be some requirements about that. We could have limits on the numbers of dogs at a time, and we can obviously establish a fee system. If the council would be interested in going this way, it takes more discussion, I think. It's a more complex series of questions about how would that work, what would we want to see. So that would take more time, and I think that would require more discussion with you. So I guess what I recognize that what in my mind was a fairly simple implementation of what I thought was in place did affect many people rather suddenly. I am asking, I think, if there's an interest for me to go ahead and do something on a temporary basis until it's something more formalized could be brought to you. And so I just asked that question. Mayor, I don't know if that's how you want to handle that, or?
Yeah, I think, well, if I may speak, and then if, from what I heard from folks earlier, I believe we are all in agreement that time is of the essence, that we want something put in place quickly because there are residents and a small business in the city
I mean, I have
that are
heard from some
impacted.
council members that time isn't of an essence,
Okay.
so I'm just.
All right, so.
There's some differences of opinion there.
Great. So I don't know if other people want to speak to, Councilmember Siemens is lights on.
Thank you. I think there's a tenet about, don't try to fix something that isn't broken. And part of the problem that I'm struggling with this is that I haven't heard a lot of people saying that we have a problem to fix. So my inclination would be to say, let's just remove the signs, and if we then wish to have a council meeting to discuss, if there should be a different process, then we would do that at that time and make a decision. But until there's a problem, I don't see the need to fix it. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith?
I just want to say that I agree with Councilmember Siemens. I didn't even know this was an issue until you brought it before us. I think that we should eliminate the signs as soon as possible and let people use the dog park any way that they want. And then, maybe down the road we can look at it as a council, but right now I don't see why that, we should prohibit any type of use of the dog park.
Councilwoman Costick?
So I also share the opinion that we should find a solution very quickly on this. I do understand that there is some concern about the wear and tear on the facility, and I'm interested in hearing a little more about that and the impact. I would definitely support moving forward on a trial basis with some sort of rental agreement or another solution, but I think it needs to be done quickly because I do think we have people waiting here who need to have their situation resolved and need to know what's going to happen. So if it is going to be a longer term discussion, then I would support removing the sign and sort of taking some time to sort that out in the meantime.
Councilwoman Searcy?
So I'm confused. Primarily because, I thought that there was an issue, or was communicated to us that there was an issue with wear and tear. And that DPW, Department of Public Works, stated that there was wear and tear.
Yes, so there's been two issues that I've heard. One is wear and tear on the park, so heavier use than anticipated of the park. The other is some residents who walk their dogs who feel a little intimidated going there when there's a lot of dogs there and have stopped using the dog park for that reason. So we've heard from those two parties.
Okay, so it seems to me that, if the argument is there isn't a problem, then that's not necessarily the case. There is a problem. And the problem is the wear and tear that's on the dog park. Now, it's in no way am I saying it's solely attributable to this business, but there's a problem that exists and we do need to come up with a solution. So I will be the first to say that I initially feel that we needed to do a little bit more of our legwork in terms of figuring out the policies around a definition of commercial, understanding what the true impact that we're trying to address. I think it's quite possible that this business could be getting blamed for other groups that are coming in. We have no idea, right? And so to what extent are we fully understanding the current use and by who of the dog park enough to be able to determine what the potential fee structure would be at all? So, and quite frankly, I think that if we're talking about any increase in terms of the cost of maintenance of the dog park, that needs to be done in conjunction with other projects that would be perhaps listed on the capital improvement plan list, right? Now, given the fact that we're talking about a relatively short amount of time between now and when we would start having more complete discussions about the budget, it would give us a little bit more time to better understand the current use of the dog park and who's coming in, who's coming out. I would be open to the idea of removing the signs temporarily until we can get a better understanding of what the problem is that we're trying to address. And then from there, have conversations about what the potential cost implications of maintaining the park would be with this current use. If that needs to go up, then identify what the fee structure would be. And then if we find that ultimately we do not have the resources and the maintenance associated with the dog park due to the commercial use is problematic, then unfortunately we may have to put those signs back up. So that's kind of where I'm landing on the matter.
Councilmember Kovar.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a short-term and a long-term component to this. As others have said, I think longer term, we can and should spend a little time figuring out what might make sense. I don't see us being able to do that until next year, given our time frame and the holidays and so on. So the question to me really is what we do in the short term. And if it's a wear and tear question, another 2 months is probably not going to really cause major difficulties. So I think I would say either go back to the way it was before, or if you have the authority, maybe say, commercial operations during these periods and set aside some sort of structure like that so that there will be plenty of access maybe during the day when it sounds like the heaviest use is early in the morning and later in the evening anyway. I don't know enough about the operation to know whether that would work, but either no signs or some sort of time limit thing between now and when we get a chance to look into it if we do next year.
Councilwoman DeBala.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think there needs to be a short term and then a more thought out approach. And I'd like to get a little more detail on what the two problems are, and so some sense of what was expected in terms of wear and tear versus what we've got and what the implications are for long-term maintenance. That's not something that's going to happen in the next couple of days, but a little more on what the problem is and what that problem is. On the problem of, quote, intimidation, people feeling uncomfortable going to the dog park. If there have been violations or warnings, or if there's been police called, or if there's been, I'd like to have a little more detail on that also, what the problems are. And I totally understand, because I've gotten them also, complaints are different from violations. People call, they don't necessarily want to have you write it down and count it in that formal sense. I get that. But to the degree we can put a little more around the problem, that would help. So I heard two problems, a little more on both of them. So that's the first thing. Second thing, short-term solution, I would be open to any of the ones that have been suggested. A short-term permit fee, short-term hours, that for commercial businesses over a certain number of dogs. I don't know what the break is on commercial between my neighbor who walks one dog a couple of days a week and someone who has a yard and a business. So somewhere in there's a distinction. In the short run, maybe we could try to find that and work on that. And I agree with Councilmember Searcy, last point, that this is ultimately a budget issue, at least part of it, and we should deal with it then. Thank you.
Great. And I'll just reiterate some of the things. I think what I'm hearing from council is that we want something done immediately to address the situation that was inadvertently created by putting up the sign for this business and the residents who use it. We look at, I agree with my colleagues, we need a better definition of commercial so that people have a handle on that and what we mean by it. And I do like the idea of having some kind, working specifically with this business and others that we may identify on doing a pilot project in the short term so that we can look at then when we are talking about the budget, whether or not this actually worked, whether or not we actually need to go to something that has more of a budget implication. The reason I say that is because I do know there are other dog walking or dog play groups in the city, and I want to make sure that we have processes and procedures in place that people understand who may have other businesses, and that there's a process they can go through. And that might take a little longer to think through, but I'm thinking if we could do some type of pilot project, see if it works, and then when we get to budget in April or May, we can get the feedback back from folks to see, well, no, this didn't work, yes, this did work, and then we can look at other things. But I think we're all in agreement that we want to rectify this situation immediately so people can go back to using
So
the
it
dog
feels pretty split about it just taking the sign down versus doing something else, so I'm not sure. I mean, certainly, there was a good number of folks who want to discuss it in more fully during the budget time. And there's very strong interest in moving something quickly, which I agree with. The question, I think, is there direction that I just take down the sign? Or is there direction that I try to find some other short-term version?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so the reason I kind of said, well, we're only talking about a few months and take them down, is whether or not the juice is worth the squeeze. I mean, we have a limited number of staff.
That's right.
And if you're having folks run a pilot and do a lot of work.
I was not intending on doing a lot of work. I don't, it's very true. We do not have bandwidth to like come up with a major project. I think there's some very simple models that other dog parks use that we could do, or we could take the sign down.
Yeah. And so for me, it was, okay, well, if we're going to invest time, and it's very clear that we're still going to have to figure out a definition for commercial. Right, yeah. We're still going to have to figure out if we do go down this process of a permitting process, like just figuring out that stuff is going to take time. And by the time that stuff is figured out, we're in the budget season and it's time to start talking about money. So that's why in my mind, my brain just went to, okay, the short-term solution is take the signs down until we figure out what we're going to do, and then you're going to back into the budget discussions anyway. But I could be wrong about that in terms of the timing, given that the council will be on recess.
Well, I actually wasn't seeing this as something that would, like the pilot project coming back to us. I think like the city manager has the administrative authority to put in place a pilot project.
But the pilot results.
But reporting it back during the budget time.
It would have to be reported back during the budget season.
Right, yeah.
So you're still, in my mind, doing the legwork for it to ultimately inform the budget discussion. Right. And so the question then becomes,
do we have the capacity?
Do you have the capacity to do that, butting up against the holidays? And is the juice really worth the squeeze, instead of like doing what you're initially proposing, looking at what others are doing, trying to get a better feel for how the current use is happening, and then having a proposal during the budget discussion? Again, I'm willing to be.
So I guess maybe I
misunderstood
misunderstood then what the city manager was proposing in her.
I'm sorry, what?
Because I thought you were proposing to do a pilot.
I was proposing to do a pilot, which would have limited hours for commercial use, which would be defined, and that there would be a fee related to that, very comparable to that we use for a lot of our park facilities and things, which is reasonable, but it would be something standard, and we would see how that works. And obviously, we would have conversations with this business and any other business that maybe have interest in doing that. That's what I was proposing as a relatively quick answer. I am not proposing to do a major research project about everybody who likes it or doesn't like it, or those kinds of things. I think there's some simple models. We would base it on the way that our rec department currently does some permitting of other spaces, and so it would be something in that vein. But there is some work related to it. It is some reporting back. When I come to the budget time, obviously, one way or the other, I'm going to say something. So there's that. So I am open to either option, but I would like to
Get
to
more
know, 'cause-
direction from us.
Yeah.
All right.
And can I ask a question regarding that? If you did the pilot, how would you deal with the definition of commercial?
Yeah, that's a good question.
So there's there are some definitions that other jurisdictions use that talk about, basically, if you've got a business license, you've got a certain, number of dogs, you've got the insurance and that kind of thing. When you're into that category, it's a business. It's not the neighborhood dog walker that's a teenager after school. It's something that's a different level. So I would use one of those kind of definitions that is currently used in other jurisdictions.
Yeah.
Yeah, my concern about that approach is that it doesn't address kind of the problems that we heard here tonight. And that is the many city residents who help to pay for that park, but have a commercial dog walker to actually take their dog there. And I wonder if a different approach, such as licensing the dogs to say that they are city residents, and that then having a stiff fine for dogs that are at the park that are not licensed. And obviously, that's not something that's checked every day, every minute, but if they are.
Right, so there's many dog parks where you're given some kind of a key or some other kind of thing that is attached to the dog collar or otherwise identified it as a qualifying dog in a way, that kind of thing. It does require some monitoring and some administration. I don't have time for that right away. I could have something set up for the next year.
Right, and I'm not sure the level of problem that I've heard, even with the wear and tear, has risen to the level of immediacy for a solution. So I would be very comfortable with
You're
that.
fine taking down the sign.
Hmm?
You're fine taking down the sign
I'm
now.
fine taking
Okay.
down the sign now
Just moving on.
and looking for a solution such as
And that's where Councilwoman
licensing.
Searcy is?
Yeah.
All right, I'm just gonna go down the line.
Making
I
it
agree.
too
I'd like,
easy.
I'm not, I'm gonna,
I'd like to take down the sign and discuss during budget.
all right, then we're taking down the sign.
Okay, thank you very much. I
I
appreciate it.
really need it, then we're taking down the sign, and we're talking about it during budget, and we don't, but
I was
I
just
would
getting
still.
ready to say.
Yeah,
I would like to raise just some other points. Fine for you to take down the sign, however, I do think there's limits that we need to establish about a threshold of how many dogs can be in the park at one time. I've personally witnessed and counted 25 dogs at one time and more coming and going. So we are very concerned about just, that dog park is not built for that type of use. And it isn't quick, it's hours at a time. I have staff that report to me regularly with large numbers of dogs, and they all appear to be coming from one business. So some of the concerns that I just wanted to raise is we are prohibiting the use of the dog park by some individuals who are overwhelmed by bringing their dog into a place where there's already so many dogs. When the dog park was established, we did consider that issue, and it's on the sign itself. It says 3 dogs per person. So it was established to be a residential use dog park, not a facility for use by commercial services. So the commercial services could be up to 3 dogs in that park. So if we want to take a look at that, we should probably consider that among it. Also, we need to address the issue of competing commercial interests, because if you have one commercial interest with 25 or 30 dogs at the park, nobody else can bring their commercial interest there. So I think whatever solution we come to has to be able to fairly address that issue and not kind of ice out the park with one business that got there first. So I think we need to be sensitive to that.
So what I've heard to take down the sign.
Yeah.
But I think that it is reasonable to put a maximum number of dogs sign of some kind, and that's something that I
and
would
we don't
like
have
to-
that right now, right?
And we
correct?
do not have
We
that.
just
No, we
have
have
it
a
by
max.
person, so
Right.
3, so that's what the rules say now. No more than 3 dogs per person in the park.
Is there such a thing as a design capacity for the dog park when it was first built, not having been on the council when this was all
We
going
can look
on?
back into notes and see. I'm sure
There's
is,
probably some
based on the
guidance there
size, the
about-
square footage of the park.
Yeah,
there's
so
some
I'll
recommended
send
use.
that back to you.
Right,
but
and I do think it would be, I mean, we're taking down the sign, we're gonna look at this more long-term.
Right.
I do think it would be helpful, though, in the short term, to meet with the owner of this business
Yeah,
to
I'd
talk
like to do
about,
that.
like, because I do think there may be other people using it, and just have a greater understanding of how to support this one business and how they're using it, as well as look at what other businesses are using it. And so we'll take down the sign, we'll do that, and then come back to it.
Yeah, I think our biggest concern is just wanting to have a max capacity at the park.
Okay, thank you. No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
that was our
Yeah,
public
we're
works
gonna take down the sign.
director.
We're opening it back. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, that's fine.
And
Yeah.
you will also cooperate and help make it work.
Yeah,
Right.
which we're gonna do. Chrissy has my phone number. She has, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, please contact me and we'll
Yeah,
talk.
and we'll.
Okay, and I do
definitely
have the rest of my comments.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
okay.
I know the.
And now everybody else can go home and watch the Nats.
I wanted to report out on the committee survey that was undertaken. We sent out surveys to 167 current and former members of city council committees, and we received 100 of those surveys back. So we're going to have wonderful information for you in November to discuss. I've got a good amount of information about the Purple Line Community Advisory Team meeting that recently occurred on October 15th, and the work that's being done on the construction, and how to stay in touch with the activities of the Purple Line. As Councilmember Searcy mentioned, there are discussions about traffic impacts on neighborhoods, on the businesses, and we've been having some discussions. What we've not had, I think, is enough discussions or any real good discussions with MDOT and the Purple Line Transit Partners about the impacts outside of the actual roadway of University Boulevard. And so lots of pressure being put to get this meeting together, and we will do it. We will be successful. A note, there was some good publicity about the pedestrian master plan of the county becoming underway. There's information online about it. One thing that I saw, that there was some kind of pedestrian hotspot maps that we can look at where it is safe to walk and where does not feel safe. And obviously, we want to ensure that people feel comfortable walking in and around their neighborhood in a safe way. I wanted to provide some clarification on the Tacoma Junction project, because there was a little bit of confusion after the last preliminary consultation with HPC, Historic Preservation Commission. Neighborhood Development Company recently did have these preliminary consultations with Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commission. The next step in the process is for the plans to be considered by the County Planning Board. And then they will go back to the HPC for the Historic Area Work Permit consideration. We wanted to clarify this, as there's been some confusion about whether the plans would go back to the HPC before going to the Planning Board. They will not. They will go to the Planning Board next. So the architects need to continue to work on the plans for their Planning Board submission. It will come to the City Council before then, because you would want to weigh in on those plans and then what gets transmitted to the Planning Board as comments as they consider those plans. We don't have dates for that yet. It's several months away, but I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. No?
If I ask a question about that? Thanks. So, as I recall from the Design Review Committee, that State Highway Administration had requested that the Planning Board not take action on this until State Highway had finished their so-called visioning process and otherwise determined what they thought would be the recommended action, if any, on the intersection. And so, is that still hanging out there to happen before it goes to the Planning Board?
But the Planning Board has some option to not wait for that. I don't know. I think they're going to be waiting for the State Highways input here. That's more information we'll have to get.
Okay, because I having witnessed the time when they did that, it seemed to be kind of a request, but sort of a firm request by State Highway, and one which the Planning Board agreed to very readily. So I'm just trying to
The Planning Board staff, it didn't go to the Planning Board.
So I'm just wondering, right, so I'm just wondering whether that, if, it would be good to find out how those two
I agree.
components of it
I would love to,
sequence.
I would love to
Okay.
find out as
Okay.
well.
Thanks.
Can I just ask a really quick clarifying question on that too?
Yes.
Sorry, did I jump in front of you?
Go ahead.
When you say it'll come back to the council before the planning board consideration, is that the planning board, the board itself, not necessarily the submission of materials to staff? Is that correct?
Put another way, are the other county agencies done?
No, because, see, the point of going to the preliminary consultations with the Historic Preservation Commission were really to talk about things like height, placement, and design of that, particularly front facade. And there's now enough kind of feedback from the HPC that that work can then go back to the discussions with planning staff and a variety of other entities, fire department, et cetera, about what's needed. And so that's what the work needs to go. And then once there's some understanding about that, and they're pretty close to having a document that a site plan that they can submit, it would come back to the council for review.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that, got everybody?
I'm not sure. So it goes to the county planning board for a vote after these other county agencies are finished with their review.
The county agencies provide the background, technical background information to the report that goes to the planning board.
So there's I'm just trying to clarify, it's not like it's going to the county planning board next week.
Oh,
There's
it's,
still
no,
county
long ways away.
staff on other agencies that have input into the county.
Right, they looked at it before,
Thank you.
they looked at it before through their development review committee, but they need to now look at it again. How do these changes affect fire department access, trees, sewer, what, all the different things, you know, those are things that have to come back. Good, okay. There were some questions about, I think, raised by residents of one particular street about why was their city street being repaved? They didn't think it was bad enough. I just wanted to, no, I mean, I understand. Sometimes it is disruptive, or there's concern about what, you know, is that the right order for streets to be dealt with? I just wanted to remind folks, I always talk about this during budget time, but we have an evaluation system where we go out and test the streets. We try to make sure that they're in, we don't want them to go into the below fair condition, because if it goes that far, it starts to damage the under portion of the street, and it's much more expensive and a much bigger ordeal for residents if it gets to that point. So one of the things I know we see a little bit of a mess, Flower Avenue and utilities, streets that are affected by utility construction. But overall, Tacoma Park has really good streets compared to surrounding areas. And that's because we keep up with our street evaluations and doing the work.
And if I can just say one thing on that, the concern, because the street was one in Ward 1, wasn't about the inconvenience or the disruption, although, of course, there's an element of that, but whether from a budgetary point of view, it was a you know, appropriately frugal taxpayer stewardship kind of thing. And I think
Which it is, yeah.
And I shared the information that Ms. Braithwaite provided. I'm not sure if she's here at the moment.
She's behind the monitor.
The monitor. But I think that was very helpful. And the point is that if you wait too long until a road is really bad, then, as I understand it, it costs more than to fix it when it's pretty okay, but maybe not pristine. And so that's sort of the balance in the system that we've worked out, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. And sliding quickly from roads to Halloween safety.
Before you go to Halloween, while we're on the subject of roads, speaking of roads that are currently really, really bad, do you want to say anything about Flower Avenue right now?
Flower Avenue, we're working with the subcontractor and contractor to make sure that they're doing the right thing. There's clearly had been some problems that we're trying to see addressed. I know that there's one particular intersection that's really bad. And so we will be trying to address those with the various contractors to ensure that it's not such a scary road, especially in that one location. On Halloween safety, Halloween's tomorrow night. It's supposed to pour. But if it doesn't, then people are out trick-or-treating. Obviously, we want them to trick-or-treat safely. There were some concerns with some of the milling that's to be done. Will that add to the problems? We certainly urge residents to walk on sidewalks as they do trick-or-treating. Our officers, our police officers will be out and about, especially in areas where the roads are a little less safe for crossing, to help ensure that if there's some problems, there's some officers around to help minimize pedestrian problems. So.
Just to clarify, I think the concerns, at least in my ward with that, were more related to there just being dust kicked up and it sort of being a not great environment on Halloween more than the safety. But I appreciate the police.
Yeah, I don't, I don't know that the dust and the kind of thing is an overwhelming issue. I understand people are very sensitive to it. We can't, ban the contractors from doing work on multiple days, and when we have weather conditions, we have to work around them. So I think in some respects, we just have to be careful and do the best we can on that. And we're monitoring it. If there's an area that seemed bad, we would avoid it. I also want to do kudos to the folks who helped with the Monster Bash. I had a bash. It was fun walking down Piney Branch with no cars. I have to say, that was nice. And I appreciate the council members who attended, and most of, I think at least a couple of you were judges, and that was great. And so we're going to be trying to move it around in different areas of the city so that different residents feel comfortable participating, and you get to see different parts of the city, which is from a especially neat thing when you're just out walking on the road. I also list here hiring update. There was a discussion, some discussions recently about how tough the job market is. It's hard for us to fill positions. If you know good people, send them our way. We're a great place to work. And not on here, it's not advertised yet, but we did have a going away party for our facilities maintenance specialist, Blanca, today. And I hate to lose good people, particularly I hate to lose a woman in that kind of a technical position where she, so women who want to have technical work, this is a great place. And so just a little urging people to look at our careers site on our website and join the city of Tacoma Park. That's it. I noticed on our agenda, for some reason, the second page didn't get copied. So we have 2 work session items. So we'll, or we could just go watch the Nats game. But
Oh, no, we're not. We have our 2 work sessions. The
Right.
first is discussion of resolution regarding SSI Intermediate Park and transfer of ownership from MCPS to Montgomery Parks.
Right. So this is this is a work session with an agenda, with the expectation that you would vote on the resolution at your next meeting. This is primarily addressing the land transfer of this park from Montgomery County, essentially the school system, to Park and Planning. And this was something that was proposed a very long time ago, that it would be transferred to MNC PPC, and it didn't take place. Now that park improvements are heavily desired and being designed, they want the actual land transfer to take place. So that is something that's going on now. We have been asked to weigh in as to if the council thinks it's appropriate for this land transfer to take place. I recommend that it is. It is a good use for a park. It isn't a good use for a new school or that kind of thing. Because of the way the park improvements were kind of scheduled, we never had a chance to really weigh in on them. So we're monitoring them. I know that a number of neighborhood meetings have been held. There's interest in concern. Part of the reason that there are park improvements is stormwater problems in the area. I know Councilmember Kovar has mentioned issues and concerns kind of about parking and construction processes. I think we'll be working well with the neighbors on those items. This item in particular, though, is about the land transfer. So if there's other questions.
Councilman Kovar?
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple of things. Thank you for that presentation. The county, I think, did a nice job of having a series of public meetings and charrettes, and there were some robust discussions at least one of them or a couple of them in terms of what was the appropriate amount of space to be devoted to tennis as opposed to futsal and things of that nature. And it's going to be a shared situation for those two sports in the end. But I think the overall design to me looks pretty good. And the concerns I had, or the questions I had, maybe they're not precisely relevant just to the transfer, but I figure it's an opportunity since this hasn't come up before. So the three things, I mentioned this in an email. One is I had heard from some people that along Boston Avenue, which is the only side street where there's really parking, because you can't park on Philadelphia and there's not much on Chicago, when there's lots and lots of soccer players, the traffic and parking there can be a challenge. And because that's right by the part of the park where the little kids play, there was some concern about that. And so depending on how this works with the addition of futsal, it would be great if we could just monitor it once it's all done, which is more than a year away,
it's a ways
just
away.
to make sure that that's something that we can look at. The second thing is, and maybe I'm sort of hypersensitive to construction impacts because of all the things that have been taking place with the WSSC project and the PEPCO project, and then we're going to be talking about the Montgomery College project. But it would be helpful to get from the county at the appropriate time, from them, here's how the staging and the other steps that are going to be taken. The last meeting I was at, they said they weren't sure if they would close down the whole park for a period of time while they did the work, or if they could stage it section by section. It seemed like they were concerned about safety with the latter. But hopefully the storage of the equipment can be there and not in the street, and not a lot of noisy stuff happening early in the morning and all those kinds of things that we've talked about. And then the third thing is, it would be helpful to have, not tonight, but just information on the stormwater plans that are being made, because I have heard from a lot of people that hill goes all the way down Boston, right to where Piney Branch and Philadelphia cross, and in heavy rain incidents, if that's the word, the water sometimes goes all the way down there and has flooded out people down at the bottom of that hill. So to the extent that can be controlled better when the park is being redone, it would just be helpful to have that information too.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other comments or questions? All right, then we'll bring this back next week. Now we are on to our second work session, which is the tree ordinance, and I believe I'm turning it over to Councilwoman Costick.
Thank you. And I think we should have the presentation.
And our city
up in a
attorney
minute.
is joining us.
There we go. So we are returning to our last work session in October on trees. I'm going to try to keep us as short as we can today, although I'm not sure that'll be super short. Let me see if this works. Oh, it does. So just a quick recap. We are talking about tree ordinance, tree canopy, and education and outreach, and sort of the interrelatedness of each of those items. We had 3 council work sessions this month. We are planning to have another work session on November 13th, which will just get into more specific draft language and some additional questions maybe we haven't discussed too in depth during these other sessions. And then a tentative session in January and potentially a vote on the ordinance in February of 2020. The canopy work, which we'll discuss further tonight, will also be a part of this, but our exact timing on voting for that will probably be a little more flexible. So the topics tonight that we are talking about are a wrap up on our discussion related to the tree ordinance, specifically on fees and pre-planting. And then we'll get more into the tree canopy efforts related to education and outreach, planting and maintenance, funding, reporting and evaluation, and other things. So first of all, we're going to start off tonight and talk about tree ordinance and fees. I'm just going to run through some of the fees that exist currently in the policy. The permit fee for a tree removal is currently $50 and the waiver fee $25. The tree protection request for a tree impact assessment is $50 and tree protection plan is $50 for the permit. And then there are the fee in lieu replanting fees as well, which are for if someone removes a tree and is required to replant, they can either replant themselves or they can pay this fee in lieu. So the big questions here are basically, is there an interest in council, among council members, in seeking a simplification of the fees to some extent? And that might involve potentially combining the permit fee and the waiver fee for tree removals in a consolidated structure or some other related structure. And then is there an interest in ensuring that the fees fully cover costs, so both for tree removal and protection, as well as that fee in lieu, which could potentially be adjusted to make sure it includes deer protection and water and maintenance for up to 2 years. Are there additional thoughts on fees or a general interest in seeking
I just had
some sort of
one question, and
simplification?
maybe Ken could weigh in on this. I recall that in some other discussions we've had, not in the tree context, about fees and so on, the fees have to reflect the actual cost of the processing? Is that or it can't
They don't
exceed
have
that?
to
Can't
reflect
exceed
it. They can't exceed it.
Right. But I think, to me, I mean, it should equal the amount of staff work that goes into it, and processing and time and so on. So I'm not sure if that conflicts with the idea of simplifying it, but if they're not where they should be now in staff, I mean, I think the staff is spread pretty thin on trees, and so the fees ought to at least represent what they are doing, would be my view.
Councilmember DeBala, did you have something?
Yeah, I was back up on simplifying fees, and I'd like to see a staff proposal for how we would simplify this, so that people aren't paying one, then they're paying another, depending on how much they paid on the first one. It'll be easier if we have a consolidated, simplified fee structure. It'll be easier for staff, and it'll be easier for residents. So that would be my request, depending on how everybody else feels about it. I'd also like, on the second question, to hear whether staff feels that fees currently don't cover costs, because I was under the impression that they do.
We haven't really done an analysis of it, so we could try to do that. There's a number of different time points, so if you were trying to cover the field visit piece, we could probably create an average, the average field visit time. And again, if we're talking about removal permits in one box and tree protection and tree impact assessment in another. So we could determine if those costs, if you also wanted it to cover the administrative cost time, the logging in, the processing of paperwork, the sending out mail, that would be a little more challenging to capture, but we could, try to allocate it.
But we're also going to more online aspects, so that would hopefully be
it
less.
would potentially change a lot if we automated the application system. So my understanding kind of historically was it was meant to cover the arborist time, not really the administrative piece of it, but more the field visit, the site visit, the specific, time it's taken to do that. And I think it certainly does. There's always exceptions, but there's also, simpler ones too. So I think we're more than covered it. In a conversation I had with Casey, was it last week or earlier this week? I can't remember when. Anyway, I've always been a little baffled by our use of the word waiver and our charge for a waiver. I just think as a simplified process, we should just have people apply for a tree removal permit. One size, one price. We determine what you get, because every time we talk to somebody, do I do the waiver? Do I do the permit? Why not we just do a fee for removal, and then we tell you what the end result is as council adjusts it. So I think an easy thing to do to simplify things would just be call it a tree removal, not refer to a waiver. You still get a permit if you're removing a dead or hazardous tree, and that would simplify things. And I think the real meat of it in terms of covering staff time would certainly be covered with a relatively low fee. I was not assuming a $50 charge for a waiver, but more something like a $25 fee that just covers everything for the application.
Some residents have suggested that the fees be reduced. I would just like to note from my work with COG that I have learned that the trend in this area for other communities that have tree ordinances is for the fees to be going up, and in some cases dramatically. So just FYI, that's the standard around here these days. 50 and 25 is pretty low.
Wait, so what is it?
I don't have it in front of me
Okay,
right now.
got it. Can you send it to us?
Sure.
Or we
Great.
can ask COG to send it to us, yeah, yeah.
So I think it sounds like people are interested in seeking some simplification and ensuring that there's at least some coverage. There's not a huge difference between the coverage and the fee, the cost of staff. One thing, as we're looking at the idea of eliminating the waiver, that I'd just like to see is how that might impact appeals, because I believe that you can't appeal a waiver. So just to take a look at as you're working on that. So moving on to the pre-planting program. This is a program where people can plant trees ahead of time and basically receive credit if they need to remove a tree in the future. In talking with Ms. Braithwaite, it sounds like this is extremely underutilized at the moment. She said there were very few or none registered at the moment. So the question here is there a way for us to improve it, and is there an interest in continuing the program and seeking some modifications that might improve its use? It seems like perhaps some improved education and outreach on the program, just getting the word out about it, might be useful. Some suggestions we've heard have been to maybe make it easier to register a tree. Another suggestion has been to allow trees not purchased from a nursery, which the staff recommendation on was to not do that, just because it was too hard to track and keep track of and sort of check off the box that it had been counted. We're going to talk a little more later in the tree canopy discussion about planting incentives in general, but regarding the pre-planting program, one of the big challenges seems to be people just don't think ahead. It's not something, people generally aren't anticipating 5 or 10 years from now they want to remove a tree and they have a space to plant trees ahead of time. So it may be that this is going to remain an underutilized program, but it may still be a program of value that we want to continue to see.
Well, one thing I was wondering about, is I got trees from Arbor Day years ago and planted them, but there was nothing there about, hey, if you register this, you could have this benefit. And that seems like maybe through that, and I don't know where else people buy their trees. We're not going to be able to ask nurseries to have advertisements for Tacoma Park's program, I suppose, but certainly when it's our own program, like with Arbor Day, just as a start, just letting people know that they can get credit for that might be a relatively simple way of doing it. I don't know if that's, even that's too much staff work, I don't know.
Well, currently, the pre-planting requires an 1.5-inch caliper tree, so not an Arbor Day tree, but a more substantial 3 to 5 year old tree.
What about the tree coupon trees?
Pardon me?
What about the tree fall planting trees?
The bulk buy, if someone were to pay full price, they could count that. They couldn't get the city's $100 rebate and then also count that towards pre-planting. So the program could be used. But the criteria that was established when this first went into place was for 1.5-inch caliper trees.
And that's
to
just
be
because the smaller trees are not reliably able to necessarily be nurtured in a productive way?
Yeah, their survival rate is very, very low, particularly now, given the deer population. But even a 1.5-inch caliper tree's survival is difficult if it's not protected and cared for. But the point being that, you've got an improved chance of survival. It's a tree that can't be stepped on or mowed over or crushed by somebody inadvertently coming across it. So it was meant to be kind of a substantial size that not easily forgotten
But if Mr. Kovar's tree is now 1.5-inch caliper after he planted it many years ago, shouldn't it be able to qualify now?
Well, we'd have to change the current definitions if
That's
we
what
were
I'm
to do that.
suggesting.
Yeah. One of the challenges, we wouldn't be able to figure out when was that, when do you take credit for that tree? Did it already previously exist or not? You couldn't sort of prove when you got it, how long you had it. We also established a growth factor that you were getting credit for year by year for the 1.5-inch caliper tree, whereas it would be a little more challenging with a tree of a smaller size.
So, I don't understand this program. I don't understand what we're trying to do with it. I don't understand what we're trying to get from it. If the idea is that we're trying to encourage people to plant in the anticipation of having credit for replanting for the loss of a tree that you don't already know what tree is going to fall and how much credit you would need in the bank, it just seems very counterintuitive. I think if the goal is to encourage more planting of trees, then maybe it's about, creating the financial incentives for people to do so. So the planting of the tree is free. Maybe it is, do we really care about when you bought the tree? Is it more important the fact that you have them? So I don't care if you bought it or you inherited it because you bought your house. If you have 10 trees around your property, I'm going to give you credit for that. And that might be an alternative way of thinking about creating the right incentive structure for folks to plant trees and keep the ones they have on their property healthy, if that makes sense.
Sure. Well, let me speak to that, because this was very specifically developed not as an encouragement for planting trees, but in response to concern about the cost of our replanting requirements. So the last time council established, took a look at the ordinance, they also heard from people about the high cost of the replanting requirement based on the criteria. What they chose to do was keep the criteria, the same percentage replacement, the same 25 years, but they were trying to acknowledge the cost of that. So they're trying to create a way to sort of bridge that by saying, if you're planning to develop your property and put on an addition and there's a tree there that's likely going to have to come down, you can plant now somewhere appropriate so that when you apply to take that tree down, you have some years of growth and it'll help reduce the amount of pre-planting, and we're going to give you credit not only for the tree but the growth of that tree in a percentage over time. So it's trying to address a very specific thing. If no one knows if a tree's going to fall over, and you wouldn't need a replanting credit if your tree did. So this replanting program has nothing to do with dead trees, hazardous trees, trees that need to be removed because they're past their life. It was specifically geared towards helping to reduce the replanting burden for those cases where people were going to be developing their lots and had a high cost of replanting requirements based on removing fairly healthy trees. So it's a very targeted program.
For my 2 cents, this has always been a difficult program. I would prefer you don't have it. I think it's administratively difficult. It's hard to explain to people. It seems to me that some of these other issues might be able to be dealt with in another way. So as you go forward, I haven't heard from staff that we think, this is something that's really helpful, and so that's something that you could consider a different
It was just a
approach.
novel idea, however many years ago, that was trying to address that issue of the cost of replanting requirements.
Yeah, and I think I would favor, it's interesting, I think when we met with the tree commission, and this was on their list of thinking about getting rid of, at first I was like, get rid of it? Because I did have sort of this weird emotional attachment to this idea, that it sounded great. But the more we've been through this process and thinking about how do we, I think, really shift the framework under which we're thinking about trees in our community from one that is individual homeowners, protecting their trees or being penalized or taking down the trees, as something that is a communal responsibility and value. How do we move more towards that? I'm feeling like this goes out of the ordinance, and when we're looking at the programs that we can do under what we're calling the tree canopy section, we look more at like what are some of the ways we can use the staff time or other resources to increase and encourage people to plant trees. And then, as Councilwoman Searcy mentioned last week, and then use resources to help people maintain trees and educate them on that. So I'm good getting rid of this.
Is there interest by anyone in keeping it, or at least maintaining it in our discussion? Councilmember Kovar?
I learned my young nephew is watching, and I promised I would wave, so I'm fine getting rid of the program.
Great timing.
Just want to encourage young people's involvement in
Yes.
the government process, that's all.
Great.
Absolutely.
Did you wave?
I did, but I think they didn't see it.
Well, wave now that you're talking.
Now I'm talking. Hello, Tommy. All right.
All right, so it sounds like people are interested in getting rid of this, which will...
Well, I think the action is incentives generally.
Right, and we're going to discuss those incentives in a couple of slides, which I think will move us further down the line in terms of what the mayor was talking about in looking at this more in a communal sense than an individual sense. So, moving us along to tree canopy. At our last work session, we talked a little bit about sort of the overarching goal idea of approaching this through a no net loss approach. And then tonight, we're going to talk a little more about some of the specifics in terms of what that might look like and how we might achieve that. This slide is pretty much an overview slide. Again, the focus is to move from regulating tree removals to a more comprehensive focus on urban forest protection. And we received some great recommendations, both from the Tree Commission and the Committee on the Environment. Some of their recommendations related to goals were to have numeric and measurable goals, and strategic goals that had concrete action steps. And in terms of strategies, not everything is listed here, but a few of their strategy suggestions were to have community ownership and expansion of participation, to target underserved neighborhoods and areas in the city, prioritize city tree planting plan and existing urban forests, revise the species list, and emphasize ecosystem services, climate mitigation and resiliency, and biodiversity. So
I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
Last week when we discussed this, I guess the Tree Commission talked about targeting underserved neighborhoods, and I read the information that they provided. Are there any other ideas that you guys have that are going to help, people especially that live in the apartment buildings, how they can get trees, maintain trees? Because that's just something I don't hear about ever.
Yeah, so some of the things we can talk about further along here, some of the incentives for planting and better maintenance start to get into addressing that. Things like perhaps reducing the replanting requirement if things are replanted on site. So for example, if a multifamily building has to take down a tree, it might be an incentive for them to replant on site rather than replant somewhere else. Just pay the replanting fee and have it replanted somewhere else. We're also going to discuss the idea of a city-funded tree planting program that would be free to residents, funded through the city. I think those could start to get at it. And we also got some recommendations to do some targeted outreach specifically to areas that are not as robust in terms of their tree canopy. So specifically talking with people, but I mean.
What I would suggest, the property managers, they have touch points with the housing department. So, they're going to talk about rent stabilization, talk about people trying to stay in their homes. There should also be some conversation or some information to talk about the importance of planting trees. Because the only time they talk about it is when they have to take a tree down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the cost of it is the big factor for them. Because these are big companies. They just don't know, why should I invest more in trees? It's just not important to them.
The one other thing I would mention was someone called to my attention this, what they call STU mapping or stewardship mapping, where you really go out before you map out where you want to plant the trees, or in some respects even sort of see where they are and really meet with all the civic groups and residents groups, and it could be tenants groups as well. The idea being that they can play a role as stewards of the trees that are planted, and there's some sort of a level of engagement, and maybe the term is buy-in, I don't know, but so people can talk about what they would like to have and understand more about the potential benefits, and that way have a little bit more of a ground-up kind of effort than maybe we've been thinking about. And I can send people separately. There's a big write-up about how this type of project can work. I think some of the other communities have used it, and it's just another piece of the puzzle for developing the canopy goals. So I'll circulate that separately later.
I also think this might be a place to connect, as Councilmember Smith said, some of the owners of the apartment buildings with Tree Montgomery. I don't know if it's a program that they're aware of, but that might also be a place that they could connect.
And if I might just jump in on the discussion with JBG at the shopping center at New Hampshire and University, the property kind of manager, very upset that Purple Line took down trees on their property. They don't have a lot of space, but they do have some. And one of the things that they said was, you know, one of the best ways to get a partnership with a property owner is to offer trees. And so they would just be happy to have somebody offer them some trees. And, you know, I think there's just not been that outreach.
Yeah, I just want to echo that sentiment. I think particularly in my ward where you have a lot of asphalt commercial space, you have to create the opportunities for planting. Like, you can't just expect for people to just do it, right? Because, you know, even encroaching on private property means they may lose a couple of parking spaces, or it may require a larger infrastructural change. But if we're able to have conversations like you all have had, they benefit as well. You know, their patrons want to create an inviting space, so their patrons will stick around longer and spend more money. So we can all want there to be a more inviting environment, and trees are one way to do it. So I do think that maybe as we're thinking about goals, and we're thinking about the canopy, that makes sense. It may be an opportunity for us to start thinking more strategically about how this effort may overlap with things in the Housing and Economic Strategic Plan. It may mean setting goals around our commercial properties that might be a little different from what we would potentially think about for single-family homeowners, which might be a little different from what we're doing with our multifamily buildings. So, and it might mean taking distinct targeted approaches for each of those groups, right? So I also think that, you know, the prime time to plant trees is when you're tearing up other stuff. So, you know, the Purple Line does create a great opportunity for us to, although we've lost a lot of trees, but to meet with the property owners. Sidewalks are going to be replaced anyway. It might be a great time to really think about how to create Green Street kind of environment along University Boulevard. Also, when State Highway ultimately, eventually, sometime in the future, get to New Hampshire Avenue, that's another opportunity where we can start having those conversations. And then as we're thinking about the creation of like pocket parks or other kind of green space, that would be a great time as well. For the multifamily buildings, I think part of the challenge, at least in my ward, is that there isn't a lot of space. But we may want to start thinking about easement space differently. There's sometimes easement space between like these commercial areas that's wooded, but quite frankly, it could be just a lot of trash trees, right? So how are we looking at like easement space that kind of no one really owns, but might be prime opportunity for planting? It's kind of thinking outside of the box in terms of where we could find space where space currently doesn't exist.
Great. So I think we actually started to discuss some of these items from education and outreach already. One of the possibilities in terms of doing more education and outreach is having more messaging in general on the benefits of trees, and that includes not just the environmental benefits, which in many cases people are very familiar with, but some of the economic development benefits of trees, some of the property value benefits of trees, so that people really see it as sort of a monetary benefit to them rather than necessarily always focusing on the broader good. Focusing as well on messaging related to the purpose of the tree ordinance as it fits in with our efforts on tree canopy in general. And then more messaging, just getting out the word regarding available resources, both in the city and beyond, and programs that people can participate in. Other ideas related to education and outreach have included improving tree maintenance information, such as how-tos, reminders, perhaps on social media, to water trees, for example, when it's been particularly dry. Workshops, more information on the website, and perhaps some more how-to specific details on the website. And then we discussed as well targeted outreach towards or areas with fewer trees and or locations with the most potential. So the additional thing to think about in terms of education and outreach is the budgetary impact. Obviously, we have an urban forest manager position, but that has somewhat limited capacity to do a lot of outreach beyond permitting. And Ms. Braithwaite and I had a discussion regarding this last week, and noted that some of the outreach we might be talking about doing could require some different skills that an urban forest manager might not be as adept at in terms of messaging or social media or creating videos, those sorts of kind of communication skills. So there might be opportunities to work with outside consultants or work with the city's communications officer to do those sorts of things. But if there's an emphasis on education and outreach, it could definitely have budgetary impacts we might want to discuss further in the spring. Are there any thoughts regarding education and outreach? My sense is people are generally interested in an increased amount of education and outreach.
I'm also very interested in pursuing targeted incentives. Following up on what the tree canopy assessment report said about targeting specific places where we know we have space to build up, and that is going to be commercial areas, multifamily buildings, less so on the single family, in some single family properties, and less so on the city properties. So I'm very interested to see a plan for city right away, but I think the action in terms of maintaining and replenishing the canopy is in these other areas, and that the sooner we can drill down to those areas rather than generic programs across the city, the more successful we're going to be.
And I would say, just in terms of additional efforts in education and outreach, one of the things I've heard from a lot of people is that in years past, or maybe in decades past, maybe there was less activity happening in terms of permits, but it was relatively common for people to be able to contact then what we call the arborist and have them come by and kind of give some advice. That's not really possible now, and it may not be possible in the future, but it's partly not possible now because there's so many permit applications going on that's what the job has become. And, we have to have a process for that, but certainly having the ability to provide more advice, even if it's in large group settings as opposed to one-on-one, similar to what we'll be doing next week with the presentation on the blight or oak infestation and related matters. That's very helpful in helping people understand more about how to care for their trees and the benefits of having trees. I think the problem is that there's a budgetary and potentially staff component to that, and that's something we'd have to talk about in the next budget cycle. But there's a lot of interest in the community in having a role that goes well beyond, I don't want to say just, but merely the processing of the permits, as important as that is. And so it's a challenge whether we can afford that, or by doing more of this online work and having maybe junior staff processing some of those things, maybe the urban forest manager can take on more of that. I think those are the kinds of things we should explore.
I was just gonna say too, I think like even just short-term things, like think about where we have Arbor Day. It has always been like here, I think, and just thinking about like doing it maybe on the rec center on New Hampshire Avenue or other places. And so, you know, maybe doing something in conjunction with Washington Adventist University and, you know, something like that, so.
Also, when we were talking about benefits of the trees, I think it's important to keep in mind other challenges that residents in various areas of the ward, various areas of the city may face, right? So you may have instances where you have some residents who might be a little more resistant to having substantial plantings that basically hide their property, for example, right? Because there are issues with perhaps camping, or there may be issues of homelessness, and they've had problems and they now don't want, you know, their entire house surrounded by trees. I think it is important to keep in mind that some of those issues exist in the city, and being open, not just from the perspective of, hey, we need to plant more trees, how can we get you to plant trees? But what are some of the issues that you are currently facing in some of your wooded areas? What are some ways in which we may be able to work with those areas to ensure that they don't fear wooded areas, right? Which is a different way of thinking about it, but it could very well be the case. And so how do we work with residents to try to make the current green spaces that we have in their area more inviting, such that they feel comfortable and want to have more trees surrounding their property? So it's a different way of kind of thinking about how to encourage residents to welcome more trees in the community, but I do think it's an important point that we need to think through.
Okay, so moving on to more planting and better maintenance. I'm going to skip the first bullet for now, and we'll come back to that. The other two are looking at ways to generally increase planting on private property. And some of the suggestions that have been made that we could consider are a city-funded tree planting program on private property. So specifically having the city purchase trees and do the planting itself on anyone's property who requests a tree. That's one option. Another possibility would be reducing the replanting requirement if, and this is going back to the tree ordinance, but reducing the replanting requirement if trees are replanted on the private property site or another private property. And then some sort of neighborhood incentive grants for planting, or it could be an individual sort of grant depending on what sort of structure, but some type of incentive grant encouraging people to do more planting on their property. In terms of improving tree maintenance, again, doing some information and reminders on social media. One possibility might be door hangers for having either the urban forest manager, if there's time availability, or neighborhood services. Certainly this would have a budgetary impact, but having someone actually go around periodically and inspect trees, maybe in a targeted area, and put door hangers on for suggestions for people, either a requirement or a suggestion to remove a tree or look at a tree maintenance issue. And then additionally, preventative actions related to tree infestations. Ms. Braithwaite and I talked a little bit about, I believe it's Minneapolis that has done some work with requiring removal of infested trees in a certain number of days, and if the tree is not removed by that date, the city actually would come in and do the removal and then charge the resident for the removal. Another possibility would be possibly requiring a tree company to show proof that they have chipped and landfilled the tree after it's been cut so that the infestation doesn't spread. That would probably be a little harder to enforce, but it could be an additional safeguard we could look at putting in place.
The other thing on the infestation, I'd have to think more about the first of the two that you just mentioned, but I think a big part of it is and this fits into the canopy concept, is finding ways to promote greater diversity in the types of species that are planted, because one of the things that that I've seen in material that I read, I may have mentioned this previously, is that if you have an overabundance of one type of species, and potentially that's true for the oaks right now, then if something strikes that species, you're just more likely to have it have a harder hit on your forest. And so part of the work that's done to promote whatever sort of planting we're going to have here in the city, whether it's in private land or in public areas, if we can find a way to emphasize more than perhaps we have in the past the importance of having a good variety of trees planted, that can also help reduce the threat. And then there's the tree maintenance and health question too, so that when there's a heavy rain period followed by a heavy drought period, you know, doing what we can to get out the word before things get really bad and the trees get into a weakened state, which again, according to what I've heard, we'll learn more next week at the evening forum, but that can you know, sort of like weaken their immune system, whatever the equivalent of that is for trees. And so these all connect. The tree planting plans and the outreach and health and maintenance are all connected to preventing this, as opposed to the things you mentioned, which may or may not make sense. I don't know enough about them, but that's after the infestation has already struck. I guess that's my only point.
Can I ask a question about the city-funded tree planting program? Do you have an estimate of how much that would cost? And
Do you have
has the
thoughts on
city
that?
ever done that before?
And along those lines, how different is that from the $100 coupon program we have now?
Yeah, it could be at whatever rate you wanted to establish. I mean, currently the city council authorizes $25,000 a year from the tree fund, and it used to be 20 or 22, and a couple of years ago the council increased it to 25 for planting in public right-of-ways and parks. One thought was those funds could be made available to planting on private property. So currently you're putting $25,000 a year from that tree fund into planting trees. You could change the location of that.
Can you
So
remind
there
me-
isn't a limit, or, you know.
Can you remind me, do we exhaust that $25,000 every year?
It varies year to year. Last year we did, prior year we didn't. We certainly hope to this year.
And so, with your experience, do you think residents would use something like this?
I think so. I think so. I think given enough outreach, I know that in this fall's bulk buy, a number of you really pushed it on listservs and encouraged people. And you know, in the past, we had been in the 15 to 20 trees per cycle for that. And more recently, it was dropping off to, you know, 6, 8, 10. This time we had like over 40 requests for trees. So I think it's one of those things you just got to remind people, get it in their minds. Many of the trees that were purchased in this fall or ordered in this fall's bulk buy were not using the $100 rebate. They were actually replanting trees required from their permit. So a good number of them people paid the full price for. So I think there is interest. I think the beauty of that program, it just simplifies things. Sort of the downside is it does limit species, and we need to look a lot more carefully about if we were to increase a program like that, what trees we want to offer, kind of to Peter's point about species diversity. But also we probably would end up needing to collaborate with a nursery and really have them grow us trees. So it would really kind of change the orientation of the program, where we'd sort of decide what our menu was and then ask various nurseries to plant those trees for us so that they'd be available. As we move into what I think I'm hearing is more support for native trees and climate-resistant trees and carbon sequestration of trees, we may be ahead of the industry in terms of available stock. So we'll need to kind of keep that in mind. It may take a while to turn that ship to the direction that we and others think we should go. So I haven't started any of that outreach yet. That would be a major piece. And I may find in talking with folks in the industry that they don't think it's a problem, but I think it's going to be. I think us having available species that we'd like to see with enough variety, it may be a challenge because we're kind of out ahead of the cherries and oaks and, you know, the kind of standard things that we offer now.
I just would like to say that I would love for us to try this at least maybe 1 or 2 years and see if we can get more people on private property to start planning at the city's expense.
And Ms. Price, when we would do this kind of program, how much assistance do you think we could offer to residents? Like, would it be outside the realm of our capacity? And if you don't know the answer to this now, it'd be fine to like help a resident to figure out where the best place on their property is to plant a tree, because I think that is also for some people who are not gardeners, who don't do this type of thing, the idea of knowing exactly where should I be planting a tree. That's
It's a real critical piece.
Yeah.
And certainly the more we can do to avoid people planting trees in the wrong place is well worth it. With our bulk buy program now, some people have a keen idea in their mind where they want the tree. Others say, you tell me. So we do a little bit of that now with bulk buy when people order a tree through that program. So I could envision that being part of the process. One of the things to take a look at, and you know, kind of a mixed minds of it, just because I'm steeped in the way we've done things, but our current public tree planting program is incredibly labor intensive. So if we were to shift that or adjust that in some way, it would save a vast amount of time, because currently we have to select the locations, we have to send letters out to all the adjoining properties, we have to give them 3 choices of trees. They have to respond. We have to pick the majority. Then we have to find the nursery that. It is a, you know, it's just a time sink. So we may want to look kind of in blending that. And again, that was a shift that was made probably the last ordinance revision in response to people complaining that why does the city get to pick which tree goes in the right of way? And so at that point, the answer was, okay, we'll let you pick. Maybe that's not the best route anymore, because what we could end up with is trees that people like to see that aren't native or aren't the best species for climate change. So again, in that interest of sharing decisions and helping people feel part of the process, we may have blunted a bit of our ability
Well, but we
to.
could also say, even if we kept it, and it sounds like maybe it's too labor intensive, but even if we kept that process, we could say, residents, you have some input into it, but it's off of this list, which is native or climate change resistant. So the only other question I had is, I mean, I agree that we should do more planning on private property. I guess the question is how we would structure that so that I could imagine, let's put it this way, that people who are very accustomed to dealing with us and people who come to the city council meetings and people who are active on the listservs and so on would get this and do it and understand. And the danger is that we'd be leaving behind some of the same areas again. So how could we,
Well, there's
how could
lots
we
of
avoid
different
that?
possibilities with that. I mean, if the direction was to start with areas that had lesser canopy, and you do a targeted program in those neighborhoods, and you promote it, and the council members promoting it, and we have social media involved, and we push it in a way that we've never done before. Again, I don't know who we is.
We is these two.
The we out there
We
that's
established
doing
we
this.
as the mayor and Susie.
But again, it would be a policy, it would be a policy decision that would basically shift those resources for those specific uses. So you could do it, you know, first come, first serve, whoever asks for it, you can do it that way. Or you could create a 5-year plan of a targeted shift, you know, so it's not always that neighborhood, but year 1 it's here, year 2 it's there, year 3, and then you create the history and the understanding. You're going to get pushback and comments either way, but the idea is for you just to create the philosophy that you feel most best reflects your goals.
Well, so we talked last week about moving more in the direction of native plantings and some adjustments there. So following on that philosophy, I'm wondering whether the time spent in doing that very intensive public process by block to get every resident to make their 3 choices off of a list and so forth. The time on that could maybe be better spent making that 5-year plan of the targeted neighborhoods. So I'd like to see more attention to whether that shift makes sense. I've had a couple of different folks tell me stories about neighborhood incentive programs that apparently used to happen here, where the city worked with the neighborhood, bought the trees, the people planted them. That works in some neighborhoods and not in others, but that's another way of stretching the dollars. But I am back with, if we're going to target the areas if we're going to target certain areas, then we may need different techniques, and maybe that's not the best one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know of any program that worked with neighborhood associations, with the exception of there was a sustainability grant that worked with the Long Branch Sligo and I think one other neighborhood.
Well, that
So
must be the
was-
same thing.
That was
'cause
basically,
that's one of the
they got a
neighborhoods.
$2,000 award. They were supposed to pick a program that they wanted to use it for, and that was what they ended up selecting.
I've lost it.
Which
I'm
isn't to
sorry.
say we could incorporate that into a program. You know, certainly we'd want to work with the neighborhood associations to promote any kind of tree planting program we develop.
Yeah, coming back to the tree fund and the bulk buy for a minute. So right now, the bulk buy is you pay $100, you get a tree, and the city plants it.
Well, a contractor does, but yeah.
Right,
Mhm.
so we're most of the way to planting on private property
Mhm.
already with that, and it's a question of targeting it and tweaking it, I think. I'd be interested in how much more it would cost to just do the kind of thing that Jared suggested. I'm also interested in, with the rest of the tree fund money, what is that, if we've targeted the 25,000 for replanting in the public right of way, what's the intended use of the rest of it?
I think it was envisioned to support that public tree planting program over time. So the funds that are generated through payments to the replanting fees as well as fines are used to fund the city's tree planting program.
So given the input that the Tree Commission and the Committee on the Environment and now us have got, I'd be really interested in what creative ways you'd like to, what you'd think about using that money over time to foster the goals of the program.
I'm sorry, it must be the hour. Not really following.
Well, I'm under the impression we don't spend out the full tree fund every
Oh,
year.
no.
So
And
I'd
it's
be
built up
interest-
over time.
Right, so I'd be interested in what your suggestions are for following on all of this creative use of the funds that we're pulling in.
So part of the discussion here, I think the actual cost of purchasing and planting a tree, it's definable. You can increase it or decrease it depending on your budget. The money and the problem is the staff time. So I don't see people going and not asking what kind of tree you want or whatever. I don't see those discussions not happening. I would anticipate enormous pushback if it felt like you were being told what tree it was. Especially if you're somebody that hasn't had trees and you don't kind of know how to deal with them, you need a lot of coaching and whatever. So as we're talking about where the monies go or whatever, maybe part of this is the discussion about maybe we put it towards staff time, or contracting for that kind of hand-holding.
You're saying it's not the tree fund, it's the staff time.
That's where I think the money is, and I think that's where
yeah.
the interest is in terms of actually making this stuff work. I really do think that the trees, there's a cost to trees, and you plant them and you figure that out. The real thing is, how many neighborhood association meetings do you go to when, and then how do you, when somebody calls, because I don't know if the tree's doing the right thing, and so, that's the kind of hand-holding that people, I think, often want. It just does take people.
So can I just ask you, in the next slide, under funding, it does say collaborate with organizations, other levels of government, volunteer and community groups. Is it possible, or do you think there's still a big staff component to supervising,
There's a big
having
staff
outside
component.
volunteer groups do it? I mean,
I think outside volunteer groups are great.
Yeah.
I mean,
But you have
we
to have
can
the
get
staff
we can
to-
get a lot of stuff from
Yeah.
a lot of help from them, a lot of insight. You know, but some years they're better than others, or whatever, and it does take some attention.
And any coordination of that is hugely impactful on staff. I mean, the thing that Cindy did with the tree walk, which was great, Conservation Montgomery came out and did a tree walk. We probably spent 20 or more staff hours just helping to facilitate that, take the emails, log people in, answer questions, get the notice out.
But now that we've done it once, we could probably get it down to 10.
You still have to answer people's,
But
it's still the
I was
same.
about to say
Yeah.
that it was great, and I'm really glad we did it, and I'd like to do more of it, but it's not zero staff time
Yeah,
to work with a community group.
Yeah, the actual time involved in the meeting, 2 hours of people's time, which is huge. That's their contribution was teeny relative to what it took to pull that off.
And I think also when we're talking about outreach, we also have to think about the biggest bang for the buck, right? So, you know, spending 20 hours on that event it might have been nice, but it may not have had as great an impact as maybe spending those staff hours on a meeting, let's say, with drilling down SHA and reaching some replanting plan along state highways, you know? So, we might want to kind of think about those strategies and whether, like, what we think in terms of the approaches would be the priority. And then from there, kind of really try to manage ourselves to that list of what we think projects we think could have the greatest impact.
Yeah, in our defense, I don't think that we thought it would take anything like that. But I agree.
It always takes longer. I guess the question I have before we get into like the funding slide is, given these last 2-3 slides, is like, what do we want the next step to be? I mean, I'm very clear on what we want the next step on the ordinance to be. We've outlined that. Our city attorney's been here. Everyone's been taking careful notes. I guess I'm trying to see how, and if we're not there yet, if I'm jumping the boat or jumping ahead, let me know. But where we're going with this, because I think Councilwoman Searcy brings up a good point, which is who and how are we evaluating all these great ideas, the cost of these great ideas, what impact we're going to have. You know, as we've been going through this and I've been looking at the slides and everything, it reminds me a little bit about all the work we did on the Housing and Economic Development Plan, because we had a lot of strategies. We spent a good deal of time talking about them, how much they would cost, the impact they would have as we worked through that. And I just don't know if we've thought about yet how we're going to take all these great ideas and move them to actionable steps.
Yeah, it's definitely a question I've had, and I think one of the big challenges is, you know, I speak for myself, but I think most of us don't have the technical background in arborist work to really understand arboristness, to really understand what does have the biggest bang for the buck, or what is the most effective. And it might make sense, for example, to look at how effective is the right-of-way planting, even on the sense of how many of those trees are dying, and how much canopy are we actually getting out of them. Yes, it seems to me that we need to take all of this and make it into something a little more cohesive. And I know Ms. Braithwaite is doing many, many other things, so that's a big challenge for you. I mean, one of the ideas that has been tossed around is the idea of forming a task force that might take what we're talking about here and more specifically narrow it down to a few very specific recommendations that could come back to maybe working with staff or coming back to us. I imagine there are other approaches. Do you have any recommendations on what you think would be the best?
Well, it's kind of a cart before the horse kind of situation. I think without knowing what resources the council has considered putting towards this, it's hard to know kind of what you can do with it, because depending on different support levels, you can do different things. Right now, and I think we've said this pretty consistently, the requirements of the ordinance and just what's taking place in our city right now, the full-time position of the urban forest manager is maxed out with just permit review, tree impact assessments, tree protection plans, and wedging in a little bit of Arbor Day, a little bit of tree planting, and coordinating the bulk buy. We can't get much more than that out of that position. If what we're talking about is an overhaul of the ordinance and change in some of those administrative requirements, that may loosen up some time, or it may not. I just don't have a good sense of that yet. But that being said, the other piece of it is I'm not sure what the council's ready to do. It almost feels like the early sustainability manager conversations. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
how much do we want to invest in this? Are we willing to kick in a staff position? Because if we're talking another 40 hours a week, here's what we can do with that person. So some of it is kind of that, or sort of, I could better respond knowing sort of what level of support and additional funding was potentially being looked at.
Well, I mean, one thing we could do is, there's some big ideas here and some smaller ideas, and maybe we could, pull together, the 6 big ideas on tree canopy and just ask what it would take from a staffing or budgetary point. We're going to be talking about this again on the 13th, and then we can see, because it's just as much cart before the horse for us to pick things
Yeah.
if we don't know what their budgetary impact is. So I think there's a lot of good ideas there. It seems like.
But I also
I
don't know
would
how
say-
do we, I mean, honestly, I'm having a hard time evaluating what would be the most impactful as well.
So I don't think a task force would be helpful.
Yeah.
I would really, I know that our staff is swamped, but they also have a pretty good idea of some of the impacts. Once we have some time, if we have a task force, they're still gonna have to do the same thinking.
Yeah.
So, that's not to say that once it gets down to some critical pieces, it isn't good to have a task force, and then you've got some numbers and you can say, gee, this one we weight higher than this or something. I'm feeling a little early on it.
And we also obviously have the tree commission and the committee on the environment that can be hugely beneficial. I don't want to saddle them with doing
More.
all of this. I know they've already done a lot, so.
There's also, in addition to a formal task force, there's also using the tree commission and the committee on environment and allowing them to incorporate some of the few folks in the city who are residents who also have the expertise but don't happen to be on one of these 2 committees.
Yeah,
Because
there
you
are-
both, the recommendations, and thank you for them, that both the Environment Committee and the Tree Commission have put forward go part of the way to what we're talking about.
And I was just wanted to offer to you that we were prepared that we were going to do more work on this, but you guys last week filled up our agenda for our November and December meetings, so please give us a little bit of time. But if this could be worked on in the beginning of the new year, we certainly could come back with some more refinements and some more specific ideas of, and certainly what we would be capable of. And just personally, I could tell you that I think the Tree Commission would benefit greatly from some sense of strategic directive, because that would guide us in planning what we do, that then would be contributing to whatever future goals may be in the next 5-year iteration of a plan. That's something I've personally felt in the 4 years that I've been on the commission. We're doing the best that we can, but we've felt like we're a little island. We're kind of doing our own thing, and it would be great to be contributing to a bigger picture. So,
And thank you for all that you have done and do. So it sounds like this is sort of an ongoing question we'll have to resolve. To me, it seems like some of this is related to funding, but some of it is also philosophical and sort of how we approach, as you said, a directive and sort of a strategy for how we're achieving these things. So there might be elements that just require shifting funding, not necessarily additional funding, or just a shift in how we think about and manage some of these things as well. So with that, then let's move on to talking a little bit about funding. As was noted before, increased collaboration with other organizations and other levels of government, as well as volunteer and community groups, could be one way to, in particular, related to outreach and education, to achieve some of those goals. We could also encourage residents and neighborhoods to take advantage of outside programs and share more information on those programs. We had a brief discussion previously about the tree fund. Daryl shared the numbers on the existing tree fund, which, if I remember correctly, was there's currently $132,000 in the tree fund, and each year the council typically allocates $25,000 for planting. So there is a fair amount of kind of reserve fund there that we could potentially look at if there's a one-time expense that we wanted to specifically look at. Probably not for the full amount, but for a portion of that. And Daryl, I think the 132 is before taking out the 25 for this year, right? So we have about 100,000, more or less. And so looking at the tree fund, there could be an expanded use of that. There's also been the idea of trying to grow the tree fund through personal donations as well, and people might be interested in contributing to it, specifically if there is sort of a specific initiative or use that they can see for those funds. And then also the idea of shifting existing expenditures, for example, from right-of-way planting or bulk buy into one of these other possibilities we talked about. So I was hoping to be done by 10, so I'm going to move us along here. Another aspect of this relates to reporting and evaluation. One possibility would be to try to align program efforts more explicitly with climate and sustainability work, so that everything that we're doing is more aligned with each other and complements each other very well. Looking to specifically focus on measurable actions that are tied to metrics, such as trees planted, percentage increases in tree canopy by ward, things that we could really look at 5 years or 10 years or 20 years down the line and be able to show and see where we are, particularly if there are situations with infestations where a large number of trees may die in a particular year, but that might not necessarily reflect on our actual spending and efforts that could potentially be quite large, but we could still have a loss in our overall canopy. And then another possibility that's been suggested is increased and detailed annual reporting on tree damage and plantings. Ms. Braithwaite, if you could just briefly provide a sense of, is there currently any kind of reporting or collection of data related to tree damage or the number of trees that are planted in the city?
We do, because we purchase them, have information, and it's actually included on our NPDES report annually, because tree planting is something that we take credit for with our stormwater program. So we know annually what we plant, both through the bulk buy as well as through the city planting. So that information is available. We really do need to get back to the annual arborist or urban forest manager report. We haven't done that consistently for a while, and so maybe we pick a better time of year. I think it used to be in January or February. That's now kind of way too busy a time, so we'll have to figure out some other time to do that. But I think we could kind of refresh that and get a clearer sense. In the past, it's mostly been what the arborist has wanted to tell you versus what the council has wanted to hear. So we could certainly start gearing that up for specific answers to questions. In terms of detail on tree damage or things like that, I mean, other than, waivers and permit removals and denials, that's kind of the way we provide data. That's the kind of information we track. We really haven't experienced before what we experienced this year, so it's really been a sea change in terms of what's happening with the oaks. We now, with our inspections, and we've been doing this now for maybe 2 months, indicate on our log whether or not there was ambrosia beetle or some other borers found. So that's the first time we've been gathering that information. It's anecdotal. I mean, it's a little better than anecdotal, but it's sort of random. That's something we can start paying attention to the degree that we have that information. During the site visit, we can start tracking that. But it'll, you know, we won't really know what it shows until we have a few years under our belt.
Thank you.
I'd like to add on the first bullet where you have aligned program efforts more explicitly with climate and sustainability work. The work that's coming out of HCD is heavily interrelated with trees. So whether it's the open, you know, kind of the public space plan, whether it's new construction, all of those, you know, the work around transportation related either controls or new projects, all of that has a tree impact. And in most cases, it means real opportunities for more trees. So I just want to make sure that it's, that actually, other than just incentives, that's where we may get the biggest bang.
Sure, and also as part of the Sustainable Climate Action Plan that you'll be hearing about later in November, the public really raised trees as an issue. We sort of feel like this process will help to flush out, certainly the tree canopy thing will help to flush out that aspect of the program, but there's going to be explicit linking of those two issues, those two plans within each other.
So is it fair to say that we'd like to see that and it's already starting to happen?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things that, and I guess it's a little off topic, but one of the things that is becoming ever more apparent to me is the fact that the Housing and Economic Strategic Plan document and the work plan associated with it involves so many departments and is really a city-wide effort. So to what extent, I know we've talked through the work plan for HCD, to what extent are other departments that play a role also feeding into that work plan so we can get a more holistic view of what folks are doing?
Well, we're hoping to come back to you with the revised implementation plan, and that'll show a lot of the connections. We certainly have a lot of discussions. Anytime we're dealing with right-of-way, it's lots of overlap with Public Works. So we'll try to be very explicit about where those different overlappings occur. A little bit with recreation, but the primary thing is between Public Works and HCD.
Yeah, great, thank you.
All right, and then our last slide here is emergency tree fund.
Before we leave the measurement and metrics, I just want to note that the two committees proposed something, and I'm going to suggest that it be part of the resource discussion. So if we have a certain amount of money in the tree fund for a one-shot deal, is it better to do an incentive program? Is it better to do to do a tree inventory? Is it better to do any of a number of things that have been proposed to move this program in a different direction? Rather than try to talk about it in the abstract, maybe the better time to talk about it is as part of a budget discussion. Because we can all sit here and say it would be great to have a tree inventory and count and better metrics, but without the resources to do it, ditto with all the other things we've just talked about.
Yeah, I would say
Am I making any
the
sense?
big question here is, as we noted before, the big question is funding, and also, you know, what is the biggest bang for our buck? What do we want to prioritize? And some of that seems like
That's what I meant, thank you.
It needs to get through sort of the process of identifying what our top items are that we value the most, and also what would just be the most effective at achieving our goals. And some of that, I feel like we need some opinions from people who know more about this than I do in terms of what really would achieve and where is the best place for our money. All right, other, emergency tree fund. The emergency tree fund is not the tree fund, but the emergency tree fund is the, an assistance program that is available to, correct me if I'm wrong, people who are at 85% of the
median.
of the median
Montgomery
income.
County median.
And available to them in terms of
removing a tree, does it also assist with replanting requirements? I guess
No,
it's
for-
typically a tree that needs to be
Right,
taken
these
down.
trees are, or at least the way we understand it, is hazardous or dead trees. Assist with the removal of hazardous or dead trees. There's no replanting requirement there.
There have been some discussions recently with, I guess, one particular incident where a tree that really needed pruning, was that eligible? It's not how we've written it up. I actually think it makes sense, but that's not how we had written it before.
So maybe there's some opportunity to look again at how that's utilized and what makes the most sense.
Yeah, and I think just promotion of that is really where it's at. I know that you all have been sharing much more information in your, routine outreach to residents, and so I think that's going to result in more awareness of it. I think we've had one applicant each year for the past couple of years since it was created, and this year we have 3 so far.
I'm really mystified as to why we have so few applicants for a program that is apparently so generous. 85% of AMI is
So it's not that
rock
many, it's
bottom.
not that many property owners?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem that we have with a lot of our, income restricted emergency fund programs. Properties in the city of Tacoma Park for single-family homeowners are expensive, and typically they would not qualify even at 85% of AMI. So, I mean, we're just
Typically,
gonna
the
have
people
issue.
that I'm familiar with, they're seniors,
Yeah.
they really are having difficulty with everything about taking care of their property.
Right.
They've got a bad tree that they, often we've flagged it, that, gee, this isn't a good situation, and we try to move it along.
Yeah.
And that's who the program was really designed for when we put it in place, so. I mean, if we want to expand it, that's a whole nother conversation, but it was specifically designed for the people who have been taking advantage of it the last few years.
Right.
And it seems like if we did decide to go with the door hanger approach, that could be something that could potentially be promoted through that, so that if people were asked or requested to take down a tree or do pruning of some type, that information could be shared.
That's right, the neighborhood services team will raise it, they'll suggest it.
Great. And then the final
But
item.
I'm sorry, I
oh,
just want to say one thing. I think it also goes to like our other emergency funds are also underutilized. So I actually think it's a whole issue of how we're doing outreach, particularly to those most in need in our community. So
That's
I
kinda where I
just
was
want to,
going
like,
with it,
it's
yeah.
not just this, but when we talk to the HCD staff too, they're always saying that, those funds are not always fully utilized, so.
Mhm. So the last item here, and we don't have to make any decisions on it right now, but there is an overview and goals section of the tree ordinance. One thing we might want to look at is amending the language in that section to focus on this broader goal of not just focusing on the removal of specific trees or protection of specific trees, but the broader perspective and situating the ordinance in terms of that broader perspective. So we might want to look at adding some language regarding tree canopy goals and focus, sustainability, climate change, native species, biodiversity, and some of the other things that we've discussed tonight as well.
I think we should, because, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and I would be happy to, I think we even have a couple of versions already from different groups that we could look at to pursue this when we look at the ordinance proper.
And I just think the key is, I don't want the ordinance to be over here and the tree canopy ideas to be over here. I know we need to do more work on them, but adding this kind of language in there as a purpose or goal of the tree ordinance also, I think, helps make that connection stronger.
All right.
So are we going to add that to the list of things we want to see
For-
when we
In the
when we
ordinance
get
revisions?
language back, yeah.
Yeah, I would say so, if everybody's good with that. All right. So that's that for our October work sessions. Yay.
Can I add one little factoid? And I should have figured out a way to throw it in later. I know Casey had asked, I think at the last meeting, maybe the one before that, sort of what percentage of people pay the replanting fee versus what percentage of people
Yeah.
agree to replant. So we did a look back of the past 14 months. And And in the past 14 months, so slightly over a year, there were 333 trees replanted requirements based on removal permits. Of those, 75% paid the fee in lieu, or 76% paid the fee in lieu, and 24% agreed to replant. The one thing we do with the replants is we follow up 6 months later with a postcard. It's kind of the honor system. Did you replant the tree? Sometimes that'll kick people to send in a check or two because they didn't get around to it or whatever. But we could look back even further, but I think that's probably pretty indicative. It felt about right. So, right now, the way it's set up, 3/4 of the time, people are paying the fee.
So does that say to you that people who are removing trees don't have space to plant trees? Or does
I
that
think they
say to
just
you
don't
that
want the
there's-
bother
I'm
of
assuming.
it.
There's
Sorry.
the- Well, that's why I'm asking. What's the,
I mean,
what
I
is the
probably
issue
shouldn't
with
hazard a guess because we haven't asked them, but my sense is it's just a simpler thing. Usually when people are in the process of getting a permit, they're doing a bunch of other stuff. One less thing if I could write a check versus say I'm going to replant something and have something more to do. It's just easier. Anyway, that's my hunch, but again, it's no scientific survey. Yeah.
So if we started planting on private property, it seems like one option might be to actually allow people to pay the fee in lieu and have those trees planted on their own property, potentially. Might be an
You mean like
inter-
helping them do that?
Yeah, basically,
Yeah, I think
the
that-
city
yeah.
could
Yeah,
help
that makes a lot
do
of
that.
sense. Basically, we'd have a contract with a nursery or tree planting company, and every 2 months or whatever, you get on the list and then you do it. Yeah.
And I think that goes to what Councilmember Kovar has been also like emphasizing. I mean, even though we could restrict what they replant, then we also know what is being replanted, and it's not just on the honor system. And so, yeah.
So would there need to be any ordinance changes to have that be a viable idea, or is that a program thing?
I think it would have to be reflected in the ordinance because we'll be requiring people to do something.
Requiring people
Right
to-
now, they have to agree to replant or pay a fee.
Could we make, so like in terms of the replanting, like is it the case that people can do a mix?
Yes.
So
And they frequently do.
if we were to still allow folks to do the mix but agree to plant, is there some way we can think of the system where it's actually more beneficial for you to plant versus pay?
Yeah, we've been tossing that idea around as a way to kind of front load it, that you gotta pay for 3 or plant 2.
Right.
You know.
That's the other thing, is right now, the replant fee in
Oh.
The way it's set up now, the fee in lieu is actually regulatory, so it's set by Public Works and with you guys' process. It's set so low right now, it actually provides a disincentive because it's lower than buying a tree in the bulk buy to plant in your yard. So that was also in the idea of incorporating more into that fee for not just the planting of the tree, but the initial maintenance to resiliency concept. That would elevate the replanting fee to incentivize the bulk buy program. So you can, there's a lot of variables in the fee structure.
And that might also explain why the numbers are what they are. Yeah.
All right,
So-
thank you.
Can I just ask one final question? After you work with a resident, do you send out a survey to find out, their experience and some of these issues that we're talking about? We don't have any data behind them. Is that-
No, we don't do any kind of customer satisfaction surveys.
Is that
But
something?
we did do the tree survey for this project.
right,
But, yeah, there hasn't been a regular.
Right. Is that something that you guys could do, or would that be just too burdensome?
Yes and no and yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's a way to do it that is less burdensome. If we can move to an automated application system, that might be one way where you automatically get an email that says, tell us how we're doing. I know what I do with most of those.
Yeah.
Delete. I don't respond. So
Yeah,
I
but
don't know that that's the best way to
We
get.
do have the like every 3-year resident survey too, which does ask for interactions with Public Works. We could be perhaps more specific about a question related to that.
But, I mean, how else would we have quantitative data to make any decisions if we don't ask people?
Well, I guess what you're asking is how satisfied were you with this?
Well, some of these
So it's
issues that were-
depending on the quantitative, what quantitative data you want to get.
Some of these issues that you say that you don't know if that's the reason why people aren't doing X, Y, Z. And we can ask that question. Is this the issue? Is this not the issue? Did you find this as a problem?
Yeah, we could do that periodically, especially if there's a particular targeted question, and we could look back at a few, the more recent folks and just give them a call or send them an email or something. I do think that when we go back to the issue of staff time and whatever, having something that's anything more deliberative, I think we have to be really careful about, again, the kind of the bang for the buck about what we spend our time on, and so we have to just be really careful about that. I appreciate Daryl's suggestion that, maybe some of this has to do with, it could be taken advantage of when we get more online. And so that, when something comes up, that maybe there's some kind of automatic reminder like, okay, so I see that you decided to just pay the in lieu amount. Could you tell us why and how did that work?
Yeah. Can we back up for just a second to fees? So we talked about the fee in lieu replanting fees and adjusting and whether or not to adjust them to upward. And so I'm not sure that I feel like I'm hearing two different things. One is that the fees are currently the same as replacement, and the other is that they're not. So that they could be higher to encourage on-site planting. So could we just get a read on that rather than take a lot of time on that now?
I'm sorry, Rendon just hit a home run. I have no idea what you just asked. Rendon.
Okay.
Sorry. You can repeat. Sorry, I'm really sorry, Cindy, but like,
That's clearly.
if you want to repeat it, yeah.
I saw Daryl scribbling, so I think she might have got it.
Did you get it, Daryl? That's the most important thing.
It popped out of my head when you said that, and I'm like, but what's the score? What's the score?
2-1 Astros.
Okay.
2-1. Okay. So what I said was when we asked for a look at the replanting fees, and so could we roll this idea into it of, is the replanting fee a disincentive? Because we didn't specifically focus on that when we were talking about it earlier. Since it is an ordinance thing, if we're going to fix it.
And I would suggest that we just develop a comprehensive list of all the things that we make sure we agree on from these 3 discussions of what we're asking
very
for
helpful.
language. Right, but
We-
not from tonight. So I know you said, yeah, but
We've-
we'll
I've
develop
started
that and we'll
typing.
present that
Yeah.
and prior to the 13th, right? Right.
No, we're just
Yeah,
giving
so-
that.
yeah.
I mean,
so-
not present it, just send it in, yeah.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
We're not having another work session. No, the next time.
No more work
We're
session.
not having another work session on this. The next time it goes to
Yeah, yeah.
Daryl and the city attorney, and then comes back with a revised ordinance at some time or something.
Yeah, and just to clarify, we've made a few, but we've made very few firm decisions in terms of where we're going. So a lot of this is asking for some language, and maybe language providing a couple of different options for us to consider, so we can look at it in that context and make a firmer decision. So I know we aren't giving you specific, like, we absolutely want to see this in some cases, but we talked about, for example, changing the waiting period on tree protection plans. So perhaps seeing some language for a 7-day option and a signature, having neighbors sign off, things like that, where maybe we could have a couple of different options to mull over as a council.
But I think there were definitely things we did like have
Yeah,
direction on,
absolutely.
like, so we don't have to have options on everything.
No.
We need to move, I'm sorry, we need to move this. We've discussed this a lot. We've gotten some great advice from our tree commission and the Committee on the Environment. And I, again, believe that between our city attorney and our director of public works, who have a great deal of experience, we have spent a lot of time talking about this. I really want your best advice to come back to us. So I would just not to,
Absolutely.
just to respectfully disagree. I personally do not want to see a draft ordinance come back with like 5 different options on every section of the ordinance. I would like for you all to reflect, you've both sat here, participated in these work sessions. You can call us, email us, reach out to the Tree Commission and the Committee on the Environment for clarifications, but I would really like to see us move this forward, so. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where we want to go. And that reminds me, though, that there's one last thing. We did want to briefly touch on city management of trees in the public right-of-way, and I had skipped over that before. So that relates to probably the tree ordinance as well as just general, so not just in the right-of-way, but in any public situation, parks, public land, right-of-ways, those sorts of things. So I think we've talked a little bit about wanting to collect some more data potentially, or have some more sense of where it is most effective in terms of planting. But I know one of the questions that has come up is how public property is handled in the tree ordinance. Could you just speak a little bit to that?
You turned yourself off there. You were getting ready to go home.
I'm sorry, I know.
Currently, the ordinance says that the city manager makes decisions relative to tree removal or tree needs on public property. So in a specific reading of that, it would seem as if that could be done in a vacuum or without any public comments. We don't hold ourselves to the 15-day period. It sort of seems contrary to the requirements that private property owners have to go through. In practice, it's not really quite that way. We have made efforts to try to more publicly, put notices out when we're removing a tree. I think that was one of Peter's suggestions a couple years back.
Yeah.
So now we post a sign on a tree before it's being removed, just to try to enhance the amount of public information that's available. Typically, in our city, we're not land developers usually, so most of what we're doing is right-of-way trees, and we just take them down when they're sick or dying, so we don't have a lot of the controversy. However, I guess you could say in decisions regarding sidewalks, for instance, we take trees down with very little process based on once we have a final plan and the sidewalk is approved, the council's approved it, if there's a tree in the way, it gets removed. What we tell people and have really adhered to is that we hold ourselves to the same requirements for tree replanting for those types of projects, for instance, sidewalk projects or other kind of projects where trees are removed. We track the size and the health of the tree that was removed, and it goes into a calculation for how many trees we need to replant on that property. And we pay for that out of the sidewalk funds, not out of the $25,000 advocated in the tree fund for that. So we do kind of have tried to make that program transparent in that way. It's not specifically written in the ordinance. The ordinance says city manager has authority over trees on public property. I think this most recently got raised as an issue with the Junction development because of the issue with the trees there and some confusion about the process and if there could be an appeal. And when we found out there was no appeal process, that was upsetting for some people to hear. So I guess it would be up to the council to determine whether they wanted to change any of the language in the ordinance currently that would provide additional levels other than what's currently.
Yeah, if I could speak to that briefly, but I also noticed that Kendrick just homered, so that's a good sign. We do hold ourselves very high standards as a city on this, but I do know that the city attorney has identified several areas where kind of the separation between the manager and the tree commission and some other things, that there's some places where this language is appropriate in the ordinance. I think the specificity that Daryl was just referring to, though, has to do with the maybe spelling out what we do, because we do follow these things, but maybe how I don't think it's written that way. It's not really clear. I've been trying to think about times when I might, other than these things like with sidewalks or just kind of rapid removal of trees that need to be removed, want to somehow use my authority to act differently, and I can't think of any. Sometimes, when we talk about activity on this site, there has been sometimes some work within this property that we've needed to deal with. But then we're telling ourselves kind of about things. So I don't have any hesitation about being clear about how we follow these provisions. There's just a couple times when I think there's kind of a legal reason to have a difference, that could be spelled out and just be made clear. And I think, the reason is very common, it has good common sense. And I think having it spelled out makes it a little less suspect about what I do, just by identifying what those steps are. And because I do want it to be very clear.
Right, and I have no concern with saying we're going to provide notice and saying we're going to replace trees in accordance with the same formula. It's just, as a sovereign government entity, we need to be able to make those decisions. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that it's frustrating to residents that we're not entirely subject to the same process.
So are you saying that you think there could be something more spelled out in the ordinance?
Yes, we could.
We could do it in the ordinance, or we
we-
could put it in some kind of other specification that makes sense.
Okay, well, let's hear back on that one. I'm thinking ahead to, so there's sidewalks, and there's a process there. There's parks, and trees hazardous, right? I'm more concerned about the city management of trees on public property in the other respect, the maintenance, the preservation, and the replanting. We talked about that earlier. But coming up is another potential joint project of city-owned property on New Hampshire Avenue that might be a rec center. So we might be seeing libraries. And the library is another one where this issue might come up. So it would be good to spell it out, what the process is, either in policy or an ordinance, and do it while we're doing everything else, so that when we get to those, people know what it is and they know what to expect.
Yeah, I don't feel like I have the bandwidth to figure out what it might be right now, but I would be interested in seeing some language and reviewing that.
What's the score? 3-2. We're up. 3-2. Are we done? All right. So then next steps, we're coming back on the 13th. You gonna come back, Ken? All right. And we'll have something and we will take it from there. All right. Thank you all. We are adjourned.